Chapter 46:11. In the beginning, although there were no traces of people on the ground below Xiaohua and Wenchu, the undulating mountain ridge and continuous forest were still somewhat lively. However, the closer they got to the light gray area, not only did the mountain ridge disappear, even the hills became increasingly low and disappeared, not to mention the forest. The entire ground began to have some bumpy undulations. These undulations were either dense or sparse. Looking from the sky, the entire ground actually looked like a sieve. The two people's figures gradually sank into the light gray area, but the space around them was not particularly different. It was just that there were more fragments in that space, and from time to time, the two people's bodies would explode. If it was an ordinary cultivator, it would naturally be difficult to resist. Perhaps they would not be injured, but no matter what, they would still have to use their divine abilities to resist. Xiaohua and Wenchu acted as if they did not see it. They still released their divine senses to explore the surroundings. Woo-woo. The wind was still whimpering, like a woman sobbing. Xiaohua did not feel anything, but Wenchu frowned and unexpectedly stopped. What's wrong? Although Xiaohua really hoped that Wenchu and the other clones had their own emotions, he was also afraid that their emotions would go astray. Seeing that Wenchu suddenly had some reaction, his heart unconsciously tightened, and he asked in a low voice. Wenchu covered her chest with a painful expression and replied, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, have you heard of this poem before? Old fragrant powder is like the past. Love and hate cannot compare. A few lines of calligraphy in the spring, even more sparse in the autumn. The phoenix is cold, the pillow is lonely. The bowels of sorrow serve wine. Even if the soul of a dream is empty, how can it compare to the dream of no?" Xiaohua was somewhat speechless, but he very carefully nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, could it be that you have forgotten? The books that you have read. Aren't they also the books that I have read? Moreover, I still remember, searching and seeking, cold and cheerless, miserable and sorrowful. When the warmth returns to the cold, it is the most difficult to reconcile. How can 2 or 3 cups of light wine be compared to him? The evening wind is anxious. The wild goose passes by, grieving, but old acquaintances. Yellow flowers pile up all over the ground. Haggard and withered, who can take care of it now? Guarding the window, alone, how can it be dark? The wutong is drizzling, until dusk, little by little. This time, how can the word worry be enough?" "That's right." Wenchu clutched her chest and nodded. "This is also my favorite poem. Previously, I had always recited it, and I remembered every single word clearly. However, I never understood the emotions behind it. However, when I see Chao Muya today, I feel as if I've awoken from my stupor, and I feel a pain in my heart. It's as if my heart is being torn apart. Damn it!" Xiaohua was a little angry now. "I was wondering why Immortal Emperor Go-Chun let you out so easily. Could it be that he saw through something and did something to Chao Muya? Perhaps." Wenchu shook his head slightly, confusion appearing in his eyes as he spoke in a low voice. Xiaohua was conflicted. He wanted to save Xin, but he was also afraid that Wenchu would encounter something fatal here. After all, he could feel Wenchu's heartache. It could be said that this was Wenchu's own feelings. To Xiaohua, this was somewhat unreconciled. He was like a kite in the sky. At this moment, someone wanted to cut the string in Xiaohua's hand and let the kite fly by itself. Xiaohua hoped for this outcome, but he did not like the feeling of not being in control. "How about?" Xiaohua probed. "I will first send you back to Shenhua continent?" Wenchu bit his lips. How could he still be the Wenchu palace master? He thought for a moment, then looked at Xiaohua. "Fellow Immortal, I came from you. We are of the same origin. Right now, my heart is in a mess, and I don't know what to do. Why don't you make the decision?" Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror. However, as soon as he shook the mirror, he thought of something and asked, "Fellow Immortal, do you remember Buddha Bodhi's choice on the primeval continent?" "Of course." Wenchu nodded slightly. His eyes flashed with a hint of light as if he had thought of something. Xiaohua also seemed to have made a decision. The Kunlun mirror did not emit a beam of light. Instead, he asked, "Humans must experience pain. The first birth of a fetus, the mother's pregnancy, and the pain of childbirth. There are all kinds of things in the mortal world, and many of them are disasters and pain. Fellow Immortal, You are now the Wen Chu star. You are luckier than most people, and even more so than I. To be a human, you must not only have intelligence, physical body, and essence, but also emotions. These emotions. If they were I, then you would not be Wen Chu, but Xiaohua. Now, I'm afraid it's time for you to truly become a human. Some pain is normal. Without these pains, how will you be reborn? At this point, Xiaohua said very solemnly, So, it's better to leave this decision to fellow Immortal. I understand. Wen Chu clutched his chest and nodded. I may not have Buddha Bodhi's wisdom, but I have Wen Chu Saint's finishing touch. I also have to face the test of heaven and earth. Let's go. With that, Wen Chu moved and headed towards Chao Muya. Seeing Wen Chu's back, Xiaohua felt gratified. He put away the Kunlun mirror, swept it with his divine sense, and chased after Wen Chu. He knew that today was important to him, but to Wen Chu, it was even more important. After flying for another 100 or so miles, the light gray space gradually shone with light again. However, this light contained a kind of gloomy darkness. When it landed in the light gray space, it seemed very decadent. A feeling of time passing by involuntarily arose in Xiaohua's heart. Looking at the ground, there were even more deep holes. The dark light fell into them like pitch-black eyes without eyeballs, revealing a powerless expression. Oh! Xiaohua's eyes looked around. At this moment, his eyes narrowed, and he looked into the distance. In his divine sense, there was a cliff 10,000 miles away. Furthermore, when his divine sense reached the cliff, it was blocked. Needless to say, it was Chao Muya. Since Xiaohua had discovered Chao Muya, how could Wen Chu not know? However, his reaction was different from Xiaohua's. He continued to look forward, ignoring his surroundings. After discovering Chao Muya, the space started to change. Large pieces of space started to shatter. Wherever Xiaohua's divine sense went, the entire space became like a beehive. The worldly energy and righteous energy became even thinner. When the air blew in this beehive, strange sounds came out. This sound directly penetrated the soul. Even people as strong as Xiaohua and Wen Chu were not used to it. No wonder Gongshu Exian was so interested in the legend of tenderness like water but didn't dare to come here. Most of the female cultivators on the hidden immortal continent probably don't have the strength to come to Chao Muya. Xiaohua thought to himself. Immortal Emperor Go Chen is truly a scheming person. No one would have thought that he would place the Heaven's Punishment prison crystal here. Xiaohua saw 1,000 zhang tall cliff appear in the distance. This cliff appeared very abruptly on this bumpy ground. Xiaohua heard the sound of wind howling like a tsunami coming from the top of the cliff. Then, he saw a layer of light cover the top of the cliff. Outside the cliff, where Xiaohua's divine sense couldn't penetrate, a light like the first rays of the morning sun slowly rose. Chao Muya! Xiaohua clapped his hands and laughed. It really is Chao Muya on the cliff. This Xiao understands now. Correct. Wen Chu also understood and nodded. This side of the cliff is gloomy and makes one's heart heavy. However, on the other side of the cliff is a fresh morning light. This is where hope lies. Chao Muya's name really lives up to its name. Unfortunately, the mysteries of heaven and earth were actually something that humans could guess. Without waiting for the two supreme cultivators of the three continents to finish speaking, the morning light actually crossed over the cliff and landed on this side of the cliff like the rising sun. The morning light quickly covered the space where Xiaohua came from, and the previous light gray color actually turned into a sky blue color. An indescribable joy appeared in Xiaohua and Wen Chu's hearts. Xiaohua was a bit dumbfounded, because where the morning light passed, the other side of the cliff was covered by a light gray color again. Chao Muya? Chao Muya! Xiaohua whispered. Could it be? It should be good. Wen Chu sighed and said, Confucian cultivators have a saying, recently books have come, only small talk, no words to say. Thus, I recognized it, listened to it, and planned to take the words lightly. See Lan Tai Song Yu, multi-talented, good at writing. Try and ask Chao Chao Muya. Where do the clouds go? Chao Chao Muya is indeed long, but Chao Chao Muya is also fickle, more fleeting than the clouds. If I'm not wrong, this cliff should have two cliffs. One is Chao Muya, and the other is Chao Muya. The morning light and dusk light constantly change between these two cliffs? It can't be. Xiao Hua was a bit dumbfounded. He urged his body to rush up the cliff in the distance. When he stood still on the cliff, an inconceivable feeling appeared out of nowhere. Sure enough, just 1,000 miles away, there was also a tall cliff on the same level as the one Xiao Hua was standing on. On that cliff, there was also a tall cultivator looking at Xiao Hua. It was very strange. Although the two cliffs were 1,000 miles apart, when Xiao Hua looked at that person, it was as if he was right in front of him. Even the shock in that person's eyes could be seen clearly. However, Xiao Hua only glanced at that person for a moment before looking down at the bottom of the cliff. Even more unexpected to Xiao Hua was that the bottom of the cliff was not the ground full of potholes, but a surging sea of clouds. Above the sea of clouds, thousands of layers of clouds rippled, covered by a myriad of colors. It was also different from the light gray and blue of Chao Muya. However, when Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over it, he was stunned again. Because even with his divine sense, when it entered the sea of clouds, he could not see the end of it. It was as if the sea of clouds was boundless. Xiao Hua, Master Xiao Lei? Master of the Scholar Palace? The person from 1,000 miles away asked. Although his voice was soft, Xiao Hua could hear it clearly. Xiao Hua raised his head and looked at that person. He cupped his hands and said, "That's right. It's this Xiao. May I know who fellow Immortal is in the Nangong family?" Chapter 46:12. When that person saw that it was indeed Xiao Hua, he didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly returned the greeting. "I am Nangong Yaji. Greetings, Master Xiao Hua. Nangong Ping Ping is my son and he has returned to my Nangong family. He will remember Master Xiao Hua's help and I will thank Master Xiao Hua on his behalf." Seeing that Nangong Yaji was so polite, Xiao Hua felt embarrassed and waved his hand with a smile. "This matter is already in the past, there is no need to mention it again. Is Nangong Tianji here?" Hearing Xiao Hua mention Nangong Tianji, Nangong Yaji was stunned and a look of disbelief appeared in his eyes. However, this look of surprise disappeared in a flash and a kind of understanding appeared. He pondered for a moment and said, "Master Xiao Hua, there is something you don't know. Not only is my family's master here, even my family's prince is also here." Nangong Yaji's words naturally had a double meaning. Hearing this, Xiao Hua nodded and said, "It's good that you understand. I'm also here for the same matter." I understand." Nangong Yaji sighed and cupped his hands. "Senior, please wait for a moment. I will invite my family's master to see." However, there was no need for Nangong Yaji to turn around. A slightly aged voice sounded from behind him. An old man in his 50s walked out from the light gray twilight. He looked at Xiao Hua and said proudly, "Spiritual Master Xiao, you shouldn't have come." Xiao Hua already knew that this person was the Nangong family's master, Nangong Tianji, from the words Taoist Xiao, and not Master Xiao. Xiao Hua looked indifferently at Nangong Tianji, who didn't greet him, and asked, "This sentence should be said by me, right?" "Humph." Nangong Tianji harumphed coldly. "I've been wondering what kind of question you're going to ask the Gauchen when you came to the Immortal Palace and destroyed the South Heaven Gate, forcing the master of the Two Pureness Palace and the Gauchen to intervene. However, the Nangong family, even the 4 great families and the 100 schools of thought on the hidden Immortal continent guessed many answers. However, no one expected that you wanted to ask about the whereabouts of the 9th princess. You should be honored," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "You are the first to know." Nangong Tianji stood there like a mountain. It was as if he had merged with Chao Muya, as he naturally exuded a domineering aura. He turned a deaf ear to Xiao Hua's reply and continued, "Since you know that my Nangong family is looking for the whereabouts of the 9th princess, you shouldn't have interfered. Or perhaps, you should have informed this old man beforehand. After all, the Nangong family is in the light while you are in the dark. Now, you and I have both fallen into Gauchen's trap. Not only you, but even my Nangong family is in a dilemma." Xiao Hua was also standing on the Day cliff. His figure was like a gentle breeze, and under the bright light of dawn, he exuded an indescribable aura of confidence. Even his words were filled with the light of dawn. "Did I tell you that the Nangong family wouldn't come to the Day cliff? Even if we know that Morning Moo Cliff is part of the Gauchen scheme, Xian is right there. Will your Nangong family give up? I won't. Nangong Tianji replied firmly. But this old man can at least persuade you not to come. Where Xian is. Even if there are thousands of soldiers and horses, even if there are mountains of blades and seas of flames, I'm not afraid. Xiaohua also said firmly. Damn it. Nangong Tianji didn't need to say anything. Nangong Jingyin had already charged out from behind him. Her resolute face was now somewhat twisted as she roared furiously. Xiaohua! Do you know how much I love the 9th princess? As a level 9 Grand Ascension stage senior, you actually dare to fight with me over the 9th princess. How do you want me to face the mouths of the people in the world? Sigh. Xiaohua also sighed. Looking at Nangong Jingyin, he thought of the fire Qilin in Ardent Fire Mountain. He raised his hand and pointed at Nangong Jingyin. Nangong Jingyin, don't put on an act in front of this Xiao. Xin is only the 9th princess in your heart. Not Xin. You are only marrying Xin for your position in the Immortal Palace and for the benefit of your Nangong family. Your so-called love is probably just your own wishful thinking. Speaking up to here, Xiaohua looked at Nangong Tianji and smiled. Since you can see that this is Immortal Emperor Go Chen's scheme, and you don't want to fight to the death with this Xiao and let Immortal Emperor Go Chen reap the benefits. How about this? You and I work together and find the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal that is imprisoning Xian. After we break it and save Xian, we will see her choice. If she goes with Nangong Jingyin, then this Xiao will leave immediately. If Xian chooses this Xiao, then the Nangong family will leave immediately. This way, neither of our families will suffer any losses. The 9th princess must go with my Nangong family. Nangong Tianji said plainly. This matter has already been decided that day in Lingyun Palace. Xiaohua's tone became even more indifferent. Nangong Tianji, you are wrong. Xian must go with this Xiao. Before Lingyun Palace, before she was imprisoned in the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal, her heart was already in this Xiao's heart. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Nangong Jingyin's face flushed red. He had calculated everything, but he missed out on Xian's heart. Right now, he was in a dilemma. If the Nangong family was defeated by Xiaohua's fortune gate, then the Nangong family's face would fall to the ground. But even if the Nangong family defeated Xiaohua and he married the 9th princess, would that 9th princess still be the 9th princess in his heart? Although he still cared about the 9th princess's identity, as a man, how could he allow such feelings to exist in this world? Nangong Jingyin, Xiaohua sneered. Looking at your appearance, this old man wants to pity you. Unfortunately, a pitiful person must have a hateful side. If you didn't take advantage of the situation and wanted to destroy Xian's happiness, how could you have fallen to such a state? Taoist Xiao. Nangong Tianji's tone was still arrogant, but there was a hint of euphemism in it. You are a Grand Ascension stage Taoist. You must have seen through the myriad emotions of the mortal world. The so-called love between a man and a woman is nothing more than two hearts. Taoist Xiao must have met a lot of female cultivators in his life. I'm sure you have experienced a lot of such things. Why should you care about the 9th princess? If you think that the 9th princess is a little interesting, there are other princesses other than the 9th princess. Why do you want to compete with my Nangong family? Or if you are willing, this old man also has a beautiful descendant. As long as you like her, this old man can betroth her to you as a concubine. Moreover, with Taoist Zhao's current cultivation, it won't be long before you ascend. If you ascend, what will happen to the 9th princess? You covet the happiness of the past few decades and delay the 9th princess's future happiness. From what this old man can see, you are the one who will destroy the 9th princess's happiness. Don't young people have a saying that if there is a kind of love, it is called letting go? Why can't you let go? Xiaohua smiled in the face of Nangong Tianji's earnest persuasion. He rubbed his nose and said, You must be a romantic person when you were young. Who knows how many women you have said these words to? If there was someone who didn't know, they would be moved by your heartfelt words. However, this Xiao finds it funny. This Xiao and Xian have true feelings for each other. Why must this Xiao let go for the sake of true feelings? Your Nangong family is sacrificing Xian's happiness for your own benefits. You are the despicable ones. Yet, you are accusing me of this. This is the biggest joke in the world. Xianxia. Seeing that his persuasion was fruitless, Nangong Tianji's expression changed and he asked, "Do you really want to fight with my Nangong family? Don't think that you can block my attack just because you are a Taoist Grand Ascension stage expert and have the Scholar Palace's master by your side. Don't think that you have the strength to sweep across the hidden immortal continent just because you have the Fortune Gates army. Let me tell you honestly, the four great families are far from what you know. The four great families that you see are only the four great families that we want you to see. Even if you have the strength to wreak havoc in the Immortal Palace, even if you have the ability to kill demonic realm experts, you are definitely not my Nangong family's opponent." Nangong Tianji looked up at the sky and said proudly, "The so-called Immortal Palace is just an empty name. The Sun family is the representative of the 100 schools of thought. They can't represent the four great families. We are only following the agreement of the ancient war to allow the Sun family to enter the Immortal Palace." Ha ha! Xiaohua laughed and pointed at Nangong Tianji. "Nangong Tianji, you are really boasting all the way to the southern heavenly gate. Aren't you afraid of being stabbed by Sun Jian's three-pointed, double-edged blade? If your Nangong family is so powerful, why are you fighting with me over Xian? Furthermore, Nangong Ping and the others know that I know the five energies unifications. You also know that the Scholar Palace's master is my good friend. I don't believe that you didn't connect this matter with Xian losing the heaven's will. I don't believe that you can't guess what I asked Immortal Emperor Gaochen when I went to the Immortal Palace. You're wasting your breath on this Xiao, trying to make this Xiao feel guilty. Isn't that just showing that you're afraid of this Xiao? Nangong Tianji, don't you know that there's a saying among Confucian cultivators, 300 taels of silver here?" At this point, a meaningful smile appeared on Xiaohua's face, and he continued, "Isn't your goal the five cheese unification technique? Why do you want to be a prostitute and set up a monument for your chastity?" Facing the Nangong family who wanted to snatch Xianxia, Xiaohua's tone was exceptionally vicious. When Nangong Tianji heard this, a hideous smile appeared on his face. "Hee, Xiaohua, since you know about it, why are you still doubting the strength of the Nangong family? If it weren't for the five cheese unification technique, how could this old man go to the Immortal Palace to propose marriage?" Chapter 46:13. TCH. Xiaohua sneered. "Don't make yourself sound so far-sighted. At that time, Immortal Emperor Go Chen didn't have the 5-Chi unification art yet. If you knew it was in my hands, you wouldn't have let Nangong Jingyin go to the Hall of Fragrance. Instead, you would have let Nangong Jingyin throw herself at me. After you flattered Immortal Emperor Go Chen and found out that the 5-Chi unification art was in my and Wenchu's hands, you realized that you had fallen into Immortal Emperor Go Chen's trap and planned to ambush me and Wenchu to get the 5-Chi unification art. And if I'm not wrong, the Dongfeng family, Ximen family, and Baiming family will all appear, right?" As soon as Xiaohua's voice faded, an even more imposing figure appeared beside Nangong Tianji. This person was over 10 meters tall, his hair was completely white, and when he opened and closed his eyes, his gaze was different from ordinary people's. In his eyes, a faint golden light was flowing, just like two suns. That person looked at Xiaohua with a face as bright as a full moon and said with a dignified voice, "Xiaohua, this old man has underestimated you." Sigh. Xiaohua looked at the newcomer and sighed, "Dongfeng Qianghao, this Xiao overestimated you. That day in Xingyue Palace, this Xiao already told Dongfeng Yushan clearly. I didn't think that you would still come. Yushan and the others are only disciples of my Dongfeng family." Dongfeng Qianghao smiled and replied, "Just as Brother Tianji said, what they know is only a drop in the ocean of our four great families. The message that you wanted to convey to this old man through Yushan, this old man has already received it, but don't you think that your little tricks are really unpresentable? Don't you all agree?" Haha, of course. Following Dongfeng Qianghao's voice, two more figures appeared on the other side of the cliff. On the left side, a tall and thin old man wearing a lake blue sword robe, who was even taller than Xiaohua by a head, stood out. This old man had a long and narrow face and a pair of silver-white eyes. When his eyes moved, a faint moonlight flowed. Wasn't this the patriarch of Ximen clan, Ximen Jianzhong? On the other side of him, a plump middle-aged man dressed in a royal blue scholarly robe stood out. Although this man's face was big, His eyebrows were slightly smaller, giving him a delicate and pretty look. What was special was that this middle-aged man's arms were slightly longer, and the index fingers on his hands were even more slender. Wasn't this the Baiming family's clan head, Baiming Chou-Ching? That's right. I didn't think that a grand ascension stage being like him would be able to see so far ahead. Baiming Chou-Ching's voice was rather shrill. Similarly, Nangong Tianji did not speak for a long time. When the other three patriarchs stood still, he sighed again and asked, Xiaohua, could it be that you saw through this from the start? If that's the case, you're even more terrifying than the Grand Mist Ancestor. How could Xiaohua have thought so much before? However, when he saw how scheming Nangong Tianji was, he went along with what Nangong Tianji said. When he heard Nangong Tianji's sigh and the appearance of the three family heads, he was even more moved. He smiled and said, There are only a few ordinary people in the world who can become saints. No one is smarter than anyone else. The only thing that you and I have more than others is that we have more information. Xiaohua did not admit it, nor did he deny it. This allowed Nangong Tianji to confirm his judgment. He looked at Xiaohua and probed, So you're saying that you're already prepared to face the four patriarchs? Xiaohua rubbed his nose and revealed a mysterious smile. He replied, I believe that I've already done it. However, whether or not I can block it depends on the strength of the four patriarchs. Of course, if you want to give it a try, you can give the order now. And, if you've already made plans, you can also give the order to attack the Soaring Dragon Mountain Range in Shao Country. You're thinking too much. Dongfang Qianghao sneered. The goal of the four patriarchs is the five Qis unification, not the Dao sects. The Shao Country and Soaring Dragon Mountain Range's Fortune Gate are things that the Immortal Palace, 100 schools of philosophers, and even Vairocana Buddha should consider. It has nothing to do with the four patriarchs. However, you have to be careful. Who knows, the Immortal Palace might have already sent their immortal army to attack the Soaring Dragon Mountain Range. When you're defeated here and run back in panic, there will be no more lair for you to lick your wounds. After probing the situation, Xiaohua was relieved. He smiled and said, If the Immortal Palace attacks, that would be the best. First, this Zhao's plan will not be in vain. Second, this Xiao will have a falling out with the Immortal Palace. Xiaohua, you actually still have hope for that bastard Gao-Chen. Shimin Jianzhong couldn't help but persuade him again. Could it be that you didn't know why he sent the master of the Wenchu Palace to your side? See. When Shimin Jianzhong said that, Xiaohua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He didn't think that the four patriarchs would make a move. Naturally, he didn't think that Immortal Emperor Gao-Chen would send Wenchu to help him. He and Wenchu naively thought that Immortal Emperor Gao-Chen was thinking for Xin. However, now it seemed that Immortal Emperor Gao-Chen was sitting high up and had foresight. He sent Wenchu to the hidden Immortal Continent to help him. He might have wanted to kill the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness. Damn it! Xiaohua cursed in his mind. However, he didn't admit it and simply said, Gao-Chen's thoughts are his business. Fellow Immortal Wenchu is my good friend. If I want to face the four patriarchs, he will definitely help. Dongfang Qianghao smiled and said, Daoist Xiao, the title of Lightning Master might not be comparable to the title of Dragon Master. The title of the Wenchu Palace Master can't buy someone's life. The four of us have been waiting for you for many days. Now that Brother Tianji has said so much, it's only to let you know the true colors of Gao-Chen. The Wenchu Palace Master gave him the 5 energy origin method, a pearl thrown into darkness. Ever since he stood on the sunset cliff, Wenchu's mind was no longer on the cliff. Instead, he looked up at the sky. His eyes were filled with confusion, sadness, sorrow, joy, and melancholy. All kinds of thoughts and emotions were born and extinguished like the wind and clouds. Since Wenchu was like this, Xiaohua was even more careful. He had said so much to Nangong Tianji, and at the same time, he was also stalling for time for Wenchu. He was very clear in his heart that it was already the crucial moment for Wenchu to break out of his cocoon and be reborn. If Wenchu missed this opportunity, who knew when he would truly become an adult? However, Xiaohua smiled wryly because Dongfang Qianghao and the others were staring at Wenchu. They clearly knew that Wenchu had the 5 energy origin method. Even though Wenchu ignored Dongfang Qianghao's words were meant for Wenchu. Xiaohua had no choice but to continue. This Xiao understands what you mean, and this Xiao has already told Nangong Tianji that the 5 Qis unification technique is here. As long as you and the other family heads of the 4 great families send out a document and hand it over to this Xiao after finding the Heaven's Punishment prison crystal, this Xiao will definitely hand over the 5 Qis unification technique to you. That way, we can solve this problem without bloodshed and won't fall into Immortal Emperor Gaochun's trap. After he finished speaking, Xiaohua stood with his hands behind his back and gazed at the sky just like Wen Chu. At this moment, the light of dawn that enveloped the cliff Xiaohua was on started to change again, and it flashed towards the cliff the 4 great clans were on. After Xiaohua and Wen Chu, the light gray twilight slowly rose again. As Xiaohua had expected, the 4 families' patriarchs also stood firm like boulders on the mountain cliff. They didn't discuss this through voice transmission. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Dongfang Qianghao spoke. Xiaohua, you've just taken over the Fortune Gate, so you don't know the hardships of our 4 families. That's why you're offering such conditions. Do you think that our 4 clans have been able to stand on the hidden immortal continent for so many years because of the so-called Confucian secret arts? No. Xiaohua withdrew his gaze and looked at Dongfang Qianghao. I know. The so-called face is more important than the 5 energy origin method in your eyes. I know that you won't agree, and Immortal Emperor Gaochun also knows that you won't agree. In my eyes, Xinxin's freedom, Xinxin's happiness, and love for Xinxin are all more important than the 5 Qis unification technique. You 4 clans know this, and Immortal Emperor Gaochun also knows this. Therefore, Dongfang Qianghao nodded and solemnly said, even if we know that this is Immortal Emperor Gaochun's plan and he knows that we will see through it, we still have to take action. This is fate. When the Nangong family proposed the marriage, this ending was already planted. Xiaohua nodded and said, I have already said this before. Shimin Jianzhong laughed and said loudly, you have said this before, but at that time, you only said it to Brother Tianji, not to the 4 clans. This old man is very interested. Xiaohua, even if you have more than 200,000 Fortune Gate soldiers, as well as the Scholar Palace's master and other 9th grade origin Qi realm cultivators helping you, why do you think you can withstand the combined might of our 4 families? This is something that even the Immortal Palace can't do, just based on the so-called love in your heart? Xiaohua had been paying attention to Wen Chu. At this time, the emotions in Wen Chu's eyes had begun to stabilize. Although these emotions still seemed a bit erratic, and there was still some distance between them and the final moment, after hearing Shimin Jianzhong's words, Xiaohua knew that he had no chance to delay any longer. He smiled and took out the Kunlun mirror, saying, love is the sun in the sky, sprinkling the sunlight down. Strength is the earth, carrying the sunlight, turning the beauty in the light into the world of mortals. Chapter 46:14. Brother Qianghao, take back your luck. Baiming Cui Qing, who had been silent all this while, finally opened her mouth. She sneered, I've said it before, a man trapped by love is a stupid donkey. If he doesn't put up a wall, he won't turn back. Your so-called not to fight if you can, is not tenable at all. Dongfang Qianghao glared at Baiming Cui Qing and said, in today's battle, the Fortune Gate will be destroyed, and our 4 families will also suffer heavy losses. Not only will the Immortal Palace benefit, that brat Grand Mist will also benefit. This will greatly affect the future of the hidden immortal continent. Naturally, we won't fight if we can. Mournful cries of the 6 armies, angry for a beauty. Nangong Tianji looked up and laughed. Xiaohua, if you fall today, your name will be remembered in the future. The 9th princess and our Nangong family's reputation will be even more resounding. Yes. Xiaohua nodded. This Xiao also thinks so. Xinxin has done so much for this Xiao, to have the Nangong family and even the 4 families as a wedding gift. This story will definitely be passed down through the ages. As Xiaohua's voice fell, the Kunlun mirror in Xiaohua's hand activated. A beam of 9-colored light shone down on the dawn and sunset cliff. 200,000 Fortune Gate's iron army charged out in formation, exuding a cold-blooded and stern battle intent. Not to mention the 4 families' patriarchs. Even the clouds in the sea of clouds were stirred up. Sure enough, it's the capital star formation. The Fortune Gate's Iron Army's reputation is well-deserved. Dongfang Qianghao nodded and praised when he saw the Fortune Gate's disciples forming 2 battle formations. Nangong Tianji sneered. Everyone's rumors are ridiculous. What Fortune Gate's Iron Army's disciples are all 5th level and above. It seems like most of them are nascent soul realm cultivators. We're making a big fuss over a minor issue. Isn't that better? Baiming Chui Qing laughed. Your Nangong family's prestige will be enhanced by annihilating the Fortune Gate. Nangong Tianji's gaze swept over Baiming Chui Qing, and just as he was about to speak, Dongfang Qianghao frowned and said, Tianji, prepare to meet the enemy. Yes. Nangong Tianji's heart skipped a beat, and he nodded. Then, he waved his hand, and a colorful flag the size of a palm appeared in the air. This colorful flag expanded in the wind, and 2 Nangong words that were embroidered with colorful silk threads appeared on it. As Nangong Tianji breathed out a mouthful of true energy into the flag, 5 colored clouds flew out from the 2 Nangong inscriptions. As the clouds surged, countless bean-sized disciples wearing golden armor rushed out with weapons in their hands. Flag of hidden troops? Wen Chu narrowed his eyes and looked at the tens of thousands of disciples falling in the air. They turned into the size of an ordinary person and said in a low voice, This is the weapon of the ancient Confucian. I thought it had been lost in the hidden Immortal continent. I didn't expect the 4 great families to still have it. Fellow Taoist. Xiaohua asked worriedly, How do you feel now? Battle spirit. Wen Chu's tone was as sharp as sword chi as he said, All the heartache, pity, and regret from before have now turned into battle intent. We'll only know the answer after this battle. That's strange. Xiaohua said curiously, You still don't know why this happened. It's like looking at flowers in the fog, fishing for the moon in the water. Wen Chu nodded and said with a smile, Let's fight. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. All right. Xiaohua replied and looked out of Chaomu Cliff again. At this time, the Nangong family's battle team had finished assembling. There were also 200,000 disciples wearing golden armor. Most of them were scholars, and their strength was about the same as the Fortune Gates battle team. Similar to the Fortune Gates formation, the 200,000 Nangong family disciples were also divided into a dozen or so smaller formations. In front of each formation, there was a disciple with Grandmaster or Martial Grandmaster cultivation holding a colorful flag. As these disciples waved their flags, the 200,000 Nangong family disciples slapped their own heads and released their true chi. Wang Wang. Although the righteous chi in front of the sunset cliff had already dissipated, the several 100,000 Nangong family disciples activated their cultivation techniques, and a large amount of righteous chi poured down. Rays of light flashed, and inscriptions flowed, and a dozen golden chrysanthemums appeared in the air. These dozen chrysanthemums looked as if they were made by heaven. Every petal and every pattern was resplendent, and a powerful aura surged out. In the air above the Fortune Gates battle team, the air started to vibrate and flow violently. When autumn comes, 8th of the 9th month, when my flower blooms, 100 flowers will die. The incense bursts into the sky, and the entire city is covered in golden armor. The poetic words formed a killing intent that pounced towards the Fortune Gates disciples. The 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples in front of them were naturally not the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples that had swept through the 1,000 demons' sacred grounds, nor were they the 200,000 Fortune Gates disciples that had fought against the devil race in the ancient ruins. However, among these 200,000 disciples, 10,000 of them were the Fortune Gates disciples that had swept through the 1,000 demons' sacred grounds. When they saw the Nangong family's disciples charging towards them, they had already given the order. The battle intent of the heavenly star formation soared to the sky as they faced the enemy head-on. Although the 400,000 disciples had yet to clash, the wind and clouds above the morning sky cliff had already changed. Layers of dark clouds formed in the sky, and tornadoes tore the dark clouds apart. A heavy pressure that could destroy a city gradually formed. The Fortune Gates disciples are indeed powerful. Nangong Tianji's face turned solemn as he said in a low voice, Although they are not as miraculous as the legends say, they are evenly matched with my Nangong family's battle team. After this battle, Nangong Tianji stopped talking and didn't say anything else. Beside him, Baiming Cho Qing laughed loudly and said, Brother Tianji, you are too stingy. Although today is a matter of our 4 great clans, it is also a good thing for your Jingyin. If you don't contribute, who will? However, seeing that our 4 great clans are one, how can my Baiming family stand idly by when the Nangong family is facing the enemy? Zhuar! Baiming Cho Qing roared and took out a bronze arrow from her waist. She threw it into the air and shouted, Zhu! Come out and meet the enemy. Boom. When the command arrow landed in the air, the blood-red clouds surged and the sound of war drums rang out from the command arrow. As the war drums rang out, the command arrow expanded rapidly. Groups of Beiming family disciples in light blue armor charged out from the command arrow with weapons in their hands. Garrison order. When Chu revealed the origin of the arrow and said with a smile, "It seems like the four great clans are also taking out their trump cards. The previous hidden troops flag and the current garrison order are both ancient military saint artifacts that have been lost since ancient times. I didn't expect them to appear together today. No wonder Immortal Emperor Go Chen is worried about the four great clans." Chapter 46:15. Humph. Xiao Hua snorted and said indifferently, "It's just a temporary imperial artifact. How can it be compared to my Taoist artifact?" "You're right, fellow Taoist." When Chu nodded and said, "The garrison order, the troop concealing flag, the troop gathering drum, and the troop withdrawal gong are the four ancient imperial artifacts recorded in the history books of Confucian cultivators. If I'm not mistaken, they're all in the hands of the four great families." 200,000 disciples of the Beiming family flew out from the garrison order and formed a team. True energy and rosy clouds surged out from the disciples and condensed into a snowy plum blossom in the air. These 200,000 disciples of the Beiming family surrounded the other side of the Fortune Gates disciples under the command of their commander. The momentum was terrifying. Ha! Xiao Hua laughed loudly. He raised a finger and pointed at the Kunlun mirror, saying, "So, the four big families are really planning to destroy my Fortune Gate. It looks like this war will not end until one side is dead. Good, since that's the case. This old man will not hold back today and let you see the strength of my Fortune Gate's disciples." Boom boom boom. Several light pillars rushed out from the Kunlun mirror. Roar roar roar. Another team of Fortune Gate's disciples roared and rushed out from the Shanhua continent. This team of disciples was different from the previous ones. When they rushed into the sky, they condensed into the shape of a rooster. It was the plentiful sun devil devouring Immortal array. This. Beiming Cui Qing was stunned. He was not surprised that Xiao Hua could take out more disciples, but the Immortal array formed by these disciples. This plentiful sun devil devouring Immortal array was Yang. Lightning surged around the Fortune Gates disciples, and the soaring aura was like the scorching sun pouncing on the Beiming family. The snowy plum blossom was already showing signs of withering. Beiming Cui Qing's shock was destined to not stop. When the 200,000 disciples lined up neatly, the murderous aura was like an unsheathed sword. He could not help but whisper, "Damn it, how many nascent soul disciples does the Fortune Gate have? Didn't they say there were 200,000? How come there are 400,000 now? Are my eyes playing tricks on me?" Shimin Jianzhong sneered. He also raised his hand and took out an ancient copper gong from somewhere. The copper gong was engraved with many armor inscriptions. These armor inscriptions glowed like silver orchids. Shimin Jianzhong didn't say anything. He flicked his middle finger and hit the gong. Bang! A soft sound was heard. The inscriptions on the gong began to move along with the sound of the gong. Rays of light gushed out from the surface of the gong and the inscriptions jumped down like fleas. When these inscriptions landed in the air, they transformed into the disciples of the Shimen family wearing silver-white armor. Oh! The Shimen family disciples roared as they landed in the air. They flew out of Dawn and Dawn Cliff and quickly formed into battle squads. In the time it took to finish half a meal, the 200,000 members of the Shimen aristocratic family had formed into an orchid-like battle team. An elegant yet formless aura filled the air once again. Furthermore, this aura combined with the aura of the other battle squads and trapped Dawn Cliff firmly. Kill. Xiao Hua raised his head and looked at the provocation and mockery in the eyes of the four great families' patriarchs. He coldly shouted a single word. The word kill turned into a ball of light and flew into the Kunlun mirror. Boom. Another pillar of light appeared and the Fortune Gates battle squads rushed out once again. Heavens! Nangong Tianji looked at the Fortune Gates disciples flying out like carps crossing the river and couldn't help but groan. Just how many disciples does this Fortune Gate have? When I saw that the profound yellow board was filled with Fortune Gates disciples, I was already shocked. However, when I heard that they had 200,000 disciples sweeping through the 1,000 demons' sacred grounds, I was even more shocked. They have 600,000 disciples. 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples. This. Nangong Tianji didn't know how to continue. He couldn't help but look at Dongfang Qianghao. He knew that a battle squad of 600,000 nascent soul realm disciples was enough to wipe out the 100 schools of philosophers from the hidden immortal continent. Even the four great families weren't willing to provoke such a powerful opponent. Dongfang Qianghao's eyes narrowed slightly. The brilliant young eyes hidden in his eyes couldn't help but shine like the sun. The shock in his heart wasn't any less than Nangong Tianji and the others. He had already known about Xiao Hua's rise from his family's secret report. Moreover, he had also carefully read all the information about Xiao Hua. Of course, he didn't know much more than Fairy Xingyu. Although the Dongfang family's ability to gather information was stronger than star-picking houses. In Dongfang Qianghao's eyes, although Xiao Hua was powerful, he was the same as the Grand Mist Ancestor and the other powerful Dao sect cultivators on the hidden immortal continent. In terms of individual strength, he was close to the peak of the 9th grade. However, in terms of the strength of his sect, each and every one of them was weak. Dongfang Qianghao and the patriarchs of the four great families had the same countermeasure to deal with this kind of Dao sect cultivator. After all, the purpose of a cultivator's cultivation was to ascend. When one reached the final step of cultivation, no one would be willing to risk their lives. As long as they didn't lose face, they wouldn't kill fiercely. Although this kind of cultivator was fierce, in the end, if it wasn't for the fact that their lifespan was limited and they couldn't break through the bottleneck, they would die of old age. Otherwise, they would be killed by the four great families. After all, a person's energy was limited. It was impossible to be vigilant against tens of thousands of disciples at all times. However, when Dongfang Qianghao heard that Xiao Hua had 200,000 disciples, he couldn't sit still. 200,000 nascent soul disciples. Not 2,000, but 200,000. This was something that had never happened on the hidden immortal continent. There had never been a Dao sect with 200,000 disciples on the hidden immortal continent. In particular, Dongfang Qianghao could see that the Fortune Gate had a close relationship with the Immortal Palace. Whether it was to destroy the Dao sect or to limit the Immortal Palace's strength, the four great families couldn't let the Fortune Gate continue to exist on the hidden immortal continent. Therefore, after receiving Nangong Tianji's message, he made the decision today. However, the patriarchs of the four great families, including Dongfang Qianghao, didn't expect that the previously unknown Xiao Hua had already surpassed their expectations. Although they had already mobilized 200,000 disciples from their respective sects to surround the Fortune Gate's 200,000 disciples and annihilate them, Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror gave them a resounding slap in the face. Today, not only would they not be able to defeat Xiao Hua, they would most likely be defeated. Since they had already come to this point, Dongfang Qianghao couldn't retreat. He raised his hand and took out a fist-sized drum and threw it into the air. Dong! As Dongfang Qianghao spat out a stream of qi on the drum, the small drum suddenly expanded and turned into a light projection that resembled a city gate. Kill! Waves of battle cries rang out from the city gate. Groups of Dongfang family's disciples in golden armor flew out valiantly. When these disciples stood still outside the cliff, there were at least 300,000 of them. The army formed by these 300,000 disciples was similar to the three aristocratic families from before, also in the shape of a bamboo flower. Their golden brilliance was mixed with soaring battle intent as they charged towards Xiao Hua's Chao Muya. However, Xiao Hua, who was standing on Chao Mu Cliff, didn't activate the Kunlun mirror. Instead, he frowned and whispered to Wen Chu beside him. There was a trace of anxiety on Wen Chu's face. Humph, strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Dongfang Qianghao coldly snorted and ordered, Jianzhong, Tianji, Cui Qing, prepare yourselves. Don't let the Palace of Literature's master escape. In today's battle, not only will we destroy the Fortune Gate and dispel the North Star's delusion, but we will also leave behind the 5 Qi unification art. After the three great families' patriarchs responded and Dongfang Qianghao was about to give the order, Xiao Hua, who was standing on Chaomu Cliff, seemed to have noticed something different. He casually raised his hand again. Boom! The Kunlun mirror rumbled again and groups of Fortune Gate's disciples flew out again. Dongfang Qianghao was dumbfounded, Shimin Jianzhong was dumbfounded, Nangong Tianji was dumbfounded, and Baiming Cui Qing was dumbfounded. The 4 Fortune Gate disciples' eyeballs spun rapidly as they watched the Fortune Gate disciples fly out one after another. They were still calculating how many Fortune Gate disciples would fly out, But when they saw more than a dozen Fortune Gate disciples flying out, the 4 Fortune Gate disciples completely gave up. Dongfang Qionghao's gaze swept across Shimin Zhenzhong and the other 2. His eyes were filled with shock and regret. The 300,000 Fortune Gate's disciples not only consisted of humans but also dragons. A total of 300,000 disciples formed a heart-cleansing winnowing basket formation. A huge shadow of a leopard appeared in the sky above the battlefield. Layers of air currents surged in the sky. The shadow seemed to be alive as it roared and pounced on the bamboo flowers. The 900,000 disciples from the 4 great families and Fortune Gate's disciples had already caused a change in the weather. The morning and evening lights began to sway under the rapid absorption of the righteous energy and heaven and earth origin energy. Even the 2 Jianghu cliffs that stood tall like jade pillars were swaying. Needless to say, the sea of clouds at the bottom of the abyss seemed to be stirred up by a giant hand. Strange hissing sounds could be heard as if a powerful monster was howling at the bottom of the abyss. This. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was gone, Dongfang Qionghuo hesitated. In his life, he had never hesitated as much as he did today. Even when facing immortal Emperor Go Chen, he was calm. He had lost his usual decisiveness. My sons. While Dongfang Qionghuo was pondering, Xiaohua raised his head and looked at the patriarchs of the 4 great clans. His eyes flashed with deep mockery. Xiaohua raised his hand again and shouted, "The Immortal Palace has been shaken by your might after you all cleared the Confucian cultivators' Xianhuang list. However, the 4 great families still have the intention to destroy my Fortune Gate. Today, you even set up a battle formation at the Chaomu Cliffs to kill my Fortune Gate. Everyone, listen to my command. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. If people offend me, I will definitely retaliate. Kill." Chapter 46:16. Kill. 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 The 4 battle teams shouted the word, kill, repeatedly. Every time they shouted, the morale of the Fortune Gate disciples rose by a notch. After the 4th shout, the 900,000 Fortune Gate disciples' morale soared. The 4 battle teams charged towards the 4 families' battle teams. Dongfang Qionghuo was filled with regret, but he didn't have time to say anything. He raised his hand and tapped on the drum, causing it to soar into the sky again. Dong dong dong. The sound of the drum resounded through the sky. Kill. Following Dongfang Qionghuo's command, the 4 flowers moved, emitting a dazzling light as they pounced on the Fortune Gate's disciples in the form of rabbits, golden crows, leopards, and roosters. As soon as the 2 sides' disciples came into contact with each other, a thunderous boom rang out, and light and clouds splashed in all directions. Xiaohua glanced at Wenchu and said, "Fellow Immortal, earlier, the 200,000 Fortune Gate's disciples swept through the 1,000 Beasts' sacred grounds, several hundred high-grade disciples cleaned up the mysterious yellow list, and the soaring Dragon Mountain Ranges Shao country established their country were all to intimidate ordinary Confucian cultivators, so that they wouldn't dare to underestimate our Fortune Gate's disciples. Today, our 900,000 Fortune Gate's disciples are fighting against the 4 families. This is the time for our Fortune Gate to establish our might on the hidden immortal mainland. After this battle, our Fortune Gate will be like the scorching noon sun, shining with invincible brilliance and looking down on the 3 continents." Sigh. Wenchu also felt pity at this time. Looking at the 2 sides fighting, there were already people screaming and falling into the abyss, he said. I still underestimated the human heart and humanity. I really didn't expect that there would be such a big battle today. Maybe there will be a fierce battle at the soaring Dragon Mountain Range. It doesn't matter. Xiaohua smiled faintly and said, "Even if there is a fierce battle, 100,000 disciples and fellow immortal Feng are enough. I don't believe that the 4 families have the strength to spare to attack the soaring Dragon Mountain Range." Wenchu nodded and said, "Their goal is the 5 Qi unification technique, so there shouldn't be any problems. Fellow immortals, it's time to come out and meet the 4 most ancient families on the hidden immortal mainland." Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed at the Kunlun mirror. The lightning Taoist and celestial being flew out of the light pillar. Xiaohua smiled and said, "I'm afraid these 2 fellow immortals won't be able to hide from the eyes and ears of the 4 families. Greetings, fellow Taoist." The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial landed in midair. However, they instantly understood the current situation of the battle. The Thunderbolt Reverend and the Celestial cupped their hands and bowed. This poor Taoist truly did not expect that the four great clans would actually want to attack first. After Xiaohua and Wen Chu returned the greeting, they smiled and said, "I'll have to trouble the two of you again today." "Humph, daring to have designs on my fortune gate, daring to disturb I's cultivation, all of them deserve to die." The Celestial being spat viciously, "May I know which one friend wants me to kill? Let's go, we'll go take a look. We'll kill whoever suits our tastes." Xiaohua smiled and flew out of Chao Muya. Seeing Xiaohua and the other three flying out, the patriarchs of the four great families also flew out on clouds. However, right after the four of them flew out, more than 10 white-haired old men also flew out. These old men were dressed differently, following behind different patriarchs. Obviously, they belonged to different families. A 9th-grade origin energy literature saint? Xiaohua exclaimed in shock when he saw these old men. Is there really a literature saint with strength comparable to a literature star in this world? Wen Chu didn't find it strange at all. He said indifferently, "The true cultivation system of us Confucian cultivators is to refine essence into qi, refine qi into spirit, refine spirit into the void, and refine the void into the heavens." The so-called scholar, master of literature, grandmaster, great-grandmaster, literature saint, and literature star are just some titles. They are different from the Tao Gates qi refining, foundation establishment, and nascent soul realms. As time passes, it's inevitable that people will misunderstand. A literature star is actually similar to a great sage in the Thousand Demons sacred ground. Without great fortune, one can't be called a literature star. As for fortune, the 100 schools of thought should have their own secrets, not to mention the four great families. Every generation's patriarch would become a literature star. But what about those literature saints who are not weaker than the patriarchs? Although they don't have any fortune, they can still cultivate. Refining the heavens and refining the void doesn't care if you have the merit of teaching them. So what if they are 9th-level literature saints? The Celestial sneered, "They are just some middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators." And, when Chu glanced at him, the Celestial replied, "But what if 4 or 5 middle-level 9th-level Confucian cultivators and 1 upper-level 9th-level Confucian cultivator attack you? Kill them all." The Celestial spat out 3 words. However, after a moment, he turned around and asked, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, can I borrow your disciple's weapon?" Xiaohua understood that the Celestial was talking about Yuan Ya's bone spear. He smiled and said, "Of course. Yuan Ya is also your disciple." "N." The Celestial nodded. "I know." After the Celestial finished speaking, Xiaohua waved his hand and took out the bone spear. The Celestial took the bone spear and waved it in the air. Swoosh! A wave of demonic qi surged out from the bone spear. The roar of the bone dragon came from the depths of the demonic qi. Damn it! Dongfang Qionghao's heart tightened when he saw the Celestial take out the bone spear. He subconsciously looked at Shimin Zhenzhong and the others. The 4 of them exchanged glances and shook their heads. "Forget it." Dongfang Qionghao gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Today, I'm afraid that the Fortune Gate's reputation will be ruined. Our 4 great families will be humiliated." Nangong Tianji's mouth was filled with bitterness. He looked at Xiaohua, who was flying over proudly, and remained silent for a long time. The Nangong family was about to lose more than the other 3 great families. Not necessarily. Baiming Chou-Ching was unwilling to give up. "Our goal is not to fight. Today, we only need to capture the Literature Palace Master and it will be a complete victory." "That's right." Shimin Zhenzhong gritted his teeth and said, "Exchanging 900,000 disciples for the 5 Qis unification technique is worth it." Good. Dongfang Qionghao also made a decision in his heart. He waved his hand and said, "Since that's the case, we will act according to the plan. Don't let Gaochen see any flaws." Xiaohua, Wen Chu, Lightning Taoist, and the Celestial had already met up with Dongfang Qionghao, Shimin Zhenzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chou-Ching. The abyss between the dawn and dusk cliff was different from the 2 sides of the dawn and dusk cliff. The void overlapped and compressed together like soft straw. Strands of black and white clouds with the aura of the stars and moon wandered freely in this unstable space. The wind in the sky was more biting cold than ordinary space. Wherever the wind blades landed, even the rocks would be cut open. Xiao Hua and the others' divine senses were not obstructed at this high altitude. When their divine senses swept through the space, they could even create layers of ripples. More than 20 supreme cultivators of hidden immortal continent had already spread out, standing high up in the sky. Their expressions were like water. Sounds of fighting screams, and the sound of magical treasures and imperial tools colliding with each other faintly came from under everyone's feet. Kill. It seemed that they had already said too much. At this point, both sides no longer had any extra words to say. Xiao Hua and Dongfeng Qionghao's gazes met, and sparks seemed to appear in the air. The two of them roared in unison and flew out. However, Dongfeng Qiongghao glanced at Xiao Hua coldly. His figure flashed, and in a flash, he passed by Xiao Hua and pounced on Wen Chu. In the eyes of the arrogant Dongfeng Qiongghao, only the master of the Wen Chu palace was his real opponent. As for Xiao Hua, he could only leave it to Nangong Tianji. Nangong Tianji, who had been planning for a long time, could finally face Xiao Hua, who was about to trample on his sec's face. His eyes were already red. Xiao Hua sneered. Why would he care who his opponent was? Since the Nangong family had delivered themselves to his door, he was also overjoyed. Lightning flashed around Xiao Hua's body as he used the Heavenly Law's embodiment technique. His golden body, which was several thousand feet tall, was formed. He immediately clenched his right fist and smashed it towards Nangong Tianji. Nangong Tianji didn't show any signs of weakness. When he saw Xiao Hua activating his avatar, he also opened his mouth. Roar! Dozens of vast chi pillars fell from the sky and smashed onto his body. Nangong Tianji also activated his avatar and chased after Xiao Hua. The few Wen saints behind Nangong Tianji were also arrogant. They activated their avatar and surrounded Xiao Hua. Then, they waved their fists and legs and pounced on Xiao Hua. Boom! Xiao Hua's fist collided with Nangong Tianji's fist. A huge shockwave surged out. Xiao Hua staggered under the force of Nangong Tianji's fist. He seemed to have lost his balance. The few Wen saints who were pouncing on Xiao Hua actually swayed slightly. However, the multicolored light around them flickered. They received the impact and attacked Xiao Hua's back. Bang bang bang. Although Xiao Hua was in a sorry state, he still tried his best to raise his leg. With a flash of golden light, an illusory figure appeared like a wave and kicked the bodies of the Wen saints. When the Wen saints saw that Xiao Hua's fists and legs were not a match for Nangong Tianji, they sneered in their hearts. They waved their fists and legs toward Xiao Hua. Bang bang bang. Several gusts of wind rose again. Xiao Hua's golden body was sent flying in the air by the two Wen saints. However, the two Wen saints' avatars did not have any special changes. Following Xiao Hua's retreat, the other Wen saints had already arrived. Their fists landed on Xiao Hua's back. With a flash of golden light on Xiao Hua's back, a powerful rebounding force rushed out. The two Wen saints actually staggered. However, the radiance on Xiao Hua's back did not even dim in the slightest. Seeing that Xiao Hua's fists and legs were ordinary, but his golden body was indeed extremely powerful, Nangong Tianji sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that he might not be able to gain the upper hand in a physical fight. Thus, he raised his hand and slapped his own head. Boom! A mottled five-colored true chi surged out. Similarly, the Wen saints did not dare to fight Xiao Hua head-on. They also raised their hands and slapped their own heads. Several streams of four-colored true chi gushed out and transformed into several large hands that fell down. Oh my! The four great families indeed live up to their reputation. Although Nangong Tianji's five-colored large hands were somewhat impure, the large hands that were formed were as hard as jade. They were even more powerful than Wen Chu's five-colored large hands. Xiao Hua could not help but praise this true chi transformation technique. I'm afraid that there are very few people in the world who can compare to it. Chapter 46:17. Several large hands fell down, tearing the void apart. The power of space firmly confined Xiao Hua within a few dozen miles. Not to mention escaping, even the wind had to stop. This spatial energy was completely controlled by the Nangong families Wen sages and Wen Chu, who were at the 9th grade of essence energy. Good, watch this Xiao's move. Xiao Hua was not afraid at all. He roared and slapped his head. Boom, boom, boom. Several thunderous roars rang out, and lightning spewed out like a tidal wave. It condensed into a giant lightning hand in the air and grabbed at the 5-colored giant hands. Gotcha! Swooshed under Xiaohua's thunderous giant hand, the Nangong family's giant hands all stopped. The true energy and inscriptions that were previously flowing like flood dragons were now as stiff as dead snakes. No matter how hard Nangong Tianji and the others tried to activate them, they still couldn't do as they wished. A kind of deathly aura that was like autumn frost directly passed through the giant hands and spread towards everyone's bodies. Damn it! Nangong Tianji roared. He opened his mouth, and a mouthful of true qi fell into the giant hands. At the same time, several Wen saints followed suit and spat out their true qi. As their true qi fell into the giant hands expanded and clashed with Xiaohua's lightning hand. The lightning was like a flood dragon, crazily pouncing on the giant hands, while the true qi was like a dragon, fiercely counterattacking. The battle between the Nangong family's Wen Chu had already affected the surrounding several hundred li. When Xiaohua and Nangong Tianji made their move, they had already flown up carefully, trying their best not to affect the disciples under them. However, the spatial storm still came crashing down like waves, and thousands of disciples were swept into it. Whether it was the capital Heavenly Star Formation or the Nangong family's battle formation, they were all messed up. Some disciples were even accidentally thrown into the abyss. The Fortune Gate's disciples were better off. After all, some of them had experienced the battle between humans and devils, and they often used some methods to train their disciples. These methods were all stored in the Fortune Gate's training grounds on the Shenhua continent. Of course, these training grounds were built by the Lightning Taoist himself. On the Shenhua continent, the Lightning Taoist and Jade Archive Xiaohua were close to gods. They could do a lot for the Fortune Gate's disciples, and many of them were close to the laws of heaven and earth. Therefore, the Fortune Gate's method of training disciples was far superior to the 4 big families. This was also the reason why the Shenhua continent was able to produce an unstoppable army. What's more, the disciples that the 4 great clans brought out were mostly their hidden strength. Not to mention that there weren't many soldiers in the hidden Immortal continent, there were very few large-scale battles. These disciples themselves had even less experience in battles. This battle highlighted one of the Fortune Gate's disciples' strengths, and that was their ability to survive in a battle between 2 extremely powerful masters. The Fortune Gate's disciples split into groups of 3 to 5, supporting each other as they tried to escape from the storm's range. Even if they couldn't escape, they remained calm, waiting for an opportunity to escape as their bodies plummeted to the ground. There were even some who were even bolder and actually used the spatial storm to attack the disciples of the 4 great clans. It was just this little bit of experience and training. After the spatial storm, the disciples of the 4 great clans had already lost quite a few. Nangong Tianji and the others naturally didn't care about the lives of the disciples within several hundred li of them. Not only did the 5-colored giant hand tear the space apart, even the faintly discernible earth, fire, wind, lightning, and other auras in the sky were torn apart. It was as if the sky was collapsing, and the entire space smashed towards Xiaohua. Looking at Xiaohua's lightning giant hand, the 5 fingers were already different in color, and the entire hand was filled with lightning. Although it wasn't as condensed as Nangong Tianji's 5-colored giant hand, it was superior in terms of the purity of the lightning, and the momentum of the lightning was terrifying. Seeing the lightning hand wave, the space between Xiaohua and the hand was immediately sucked dry. Countless hurricanes and indescribable fluctuations rushed out from the torn space, violently pouncing towards Xiaohua. This storm, which could instantly kill an ordinary cultivator, fell on Xiaohua's golden body, but it only set off some ripples of golden light. Boom, boom, boom. The thunderous hand clashed with several 5-colored hands, and a destructive aura that was even more powerful than the collapse of the heavens and the earth rose from the sky. The thunderous hand was shattered, and countless thunderbolts flew in all directions, smashing into the void and shattering it. The 5-colored hands were also torn apart, and the translucent jade-like hands turned into countless fragments. Countless fragments also turned into fragmented aura and disappeared into the void. Violent gales rose, and the storm rolled. Within 1,000 li, the wind and clouds surged. Even someone as strong as Nangong Tianji staggered, and the protective light around his body was also blown away like a candle in the wind. With Nangong Tianji in such a state, those 9th-grade essence energy literary saints were even more embarrassed. Their bodies lost their balance, and they quickly rushed out of the storm. These literary saints were also shocked. Just a casual clash of divine abilities could cause such a huge commotion, and Xiaohua actually didn't fall into a disadvantageous position even when fighting against so many of them. This was something they really didn't expect. However, in this world, there were only more surprises, but no more surprises. Just as they were about to get out of the range of the storm, suddenly, a light figure rushed out from the lightning fragments. Xiaohua's tall and thin figure actually went against the wind, and with the help of the wind, he instantly appeared in front of them. What is this guy doing? The cultivation method of the literary saints of Confucianism was different from that of the Taoism cultivators. They had always emphasized practicing. Moreover, the true 5 Qis unification technique was to refine the 5 viscera and 6 bowels. The cultivation methods of the 4 major families were incomplete, but there were more or less traces of the true cultivation methods. Therefore, most of the disciples of the 4 major families would refine their bodies while refining their qi. When these literary saints saw Xiaohua suddenly appear, they were surprised, but they weren't particularly afraid. In fact, they were even a little confused. After all, they believed that the cultivation of their physical bodies was definitely stronger than that of the Taoism cultivators of the same level. Moreover, Xiaohua didn't gain any advantage when he was surrounded by so many people. Instead, he seemed to be losing. Seeing Xiaohua's figure appear, he waved his fist, and like several phantoms, he landed on several literary saints. These literary saints' hearts were filled with disdain, and the same thought emerged from the bottom of their hearts. Damn it! My divine abilities may not be as powerful as a human Mahayana stage cultivator, but didn't we already see the power of my fists and feet? It's just that I'm a little stronger and my skin is thicker. Therefore, while these literary saints were on guard against Xiaohua's backup plan, they also slacked off and swung their fists and legs to meet the enemy. There was even a literary saint who actually used the eye-clearing technique to test the strength of this punch. In the distance, Nangong Tianji also ignored Xiaohua's sudden intrusion, and a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Amidst the fierce wind, his figure strangely flashed with multicolored light, turning into a distorted light shadow, and rushed behind Xiaohua like lightning, preparing to gang up on Xiaohua with the other literary saints. As expected, Xiaohua's fist collided with the fist of one of the literary saints. Boom! A sound that wasn't very loud rang out. Wen Shang, who had a smile on his face, suddenly had a change in expression the instant his fist came into contact with Xiaohua's fist. This was because he saw that Xiaohua's fist had suddenly shrunk, and a black halo of light had unexpectedly appeared in the air. Not good. Wen Shang, who was proficient in body cultivation, immediately sensed that something was wrong from the force of the fist coming into contact with Xiaohua's fist, and an unavoidable feeling arose spontaneously. However, before he could open his mouth to warn the others, Xiaohua's fist had already landed. The sound of the explosion wasn't loud, but the power was extremely great. Nangong Tianji and the others could see that the literary saint's subbody, starting from the fist, followed by his arm, all the way until half of his subbody collapsed with a loud bang, and countless inscriptions were annihilated in the collapse. In this collapse, the noble qi turned into a vortex, and pieces of flesh and blood burst out at the same time. On the side of the collapsed subbody and physical body of the literary saint, more than 10 layers of space appeared, and the flesh and blood of the literary saint were swallowed by the void, and could no longer be recovered. Damn it! Seeing the power of Xiaohua's fist, Nangong Tianji cursed inwardly. He realized that Xiaohua's previous move was just a tactic to lure the enemy. He hurriedly sped up and sent out a palm strike, wanting to attract Xiaohua's attention. Unfortunately, just as Nangong Tianji came to his senses, Xiaohua's fist wind pounced towards the other literary saint. That literary saint had long been scared witless after seeing the power of Xiaohua's fist. He didn't dare to take Xiaohua's fist head-on, and tried to move his body to dodge. It was also at this moment, woo! The sound of the wind rose again, and under the body of the literary saint, Xiaohua's leg stretched out from the void, and kicked the waist of the literary saint. The strength of a leg has always surpassed the wind of a fist. When Xiaohua's leg landed, the subbody of the literary saint collapsed bit by bit, and an oval-shaped black hole fell into the body of the literary saint. Ah! The literary saint screamed miserably, and a bloody light appeared at the collapsed area again. His subbody rapidly shrank, and his physical body was almost cut in half. At the same time that Xiaohua succeeded in killing the second literary saint, Nangong Tianji's palm also arrived. Contrary to Nangong Tianji's expectations, Xiao Hua didn't dodge at all. Seeing Xiao Hua so confident, Nangong Tianji suddenly thought of the situation when Xiao Hua was hit by the two literary saints, and he couldn't help but feel that things were not good. Pa! Another loud sound rang out. Nangong Tianji's palm was indeed accumulating strength. If a mountain was here, it would probably be pushed down by his palm. Xiao Hua wasn't a mountain, and naturally, he couldn't block Nangong Tianji's palm. However, Xiao Hua's golden body was sent flying by Nangong Tianji's palm. Xiao Hua's golden body instantly collapsed, and the golden light was quickly extinguished. Xiao Hua's figure actually pounced on the third literary saint. How could Nangong Tianji not know Xiao Hua's plan? The tricks that ordinary martial artists often used in the competition were actually used by the Taoist sect's Grand Ascension stage cultivators in this supreme battle. This was not only beyond Nangong Tianji's expectations, but it was also out of Nangong Tianji's expectations. Nangong Tianji couldn't help but gnash his teeth and say, "Damn it! Borrowing strength to fight strength." Chapter 46:18. Of course, Nangong Tianji's curiosity was piqued. After all, he knew the strength of his palm. Even if Immortal Emperor Go Chen was here, he wouldn't dare to let his palm land on his body. Unless it was the 7 great sages from the Great Sage Hall. At the thought of this, Nangong Tianji suddenly realized something and shouted, "Pingu, retreat! This bastard's body is extremely strong, don't." Nangong Tianji originally wanted to say, "Don't let him get close," but he was only halfway through when Xiao Hua had already forced himself to the side of the literature sage named Nangong Pingu. This literature sage, who had just used the clear eyes technique to probe the strength of Xiao Hua's fist, had only blocked Xiao Hua's left fist, and was immediately hit in the shoulder by Xiao Hua's right fist. Boom! Another muffled sound rang out. Nangong Pingu's subbody began to collapse from the shoulder. In an instant, the subbody was shattered, and even the body below the subbody was affected. Blood and flesh flew everywhere. However, Nangong Pingu, who was about to faint from the pain, stared at Xiao Hua, who was soaring into the sky. His eyes were filled with confusion. This was because he could clearly see that the fist that was about to strike his heart had swerved slightly and was now aiming for his shoulder. The fact that he hadn't been killed on the spot wasn't because he was lucky, nor was it because he had managed to evade in time. Instead, it was because this Grand Ascension stage Taoist was holding back. Seeing the 3 9th grade sage of origin energy being killed or injured by Xiao Hua in just a few rounds, Nangong Tianji's heart ached as if it was being stabbed by a knife. He knew very well in his heart which of those Confucian cultivators who were able to cultivate to the 9th grade of origin energy did not possess supreme skills. Although these Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall were not Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall, even if they were facing Immortal Emperor Go Chen, they wouldn't be injured in just a few rounds. This was also the reason why he, as the patriarch of the 4 great clans, was not worried about letting these 9th grade Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall fight. However, Nangong Tianji didn't expect Xiao Hua's Great Sage Hall's Great Sage Hall to be able to flatten a mountain with a single punch. As a result, these 3 9th grade literary saints were killed and injured by Xiao Hua before they could even use the true divine arts of the Confucian cultivators. This purely physical injury was even more severe than Taoist magic power. Even though Xiao Hua didn't take Nangong Pingu's life today, it would be difficult for this 9th grade Essence Force literary sage to advance his cultivation in the future. Even one's lifespan would be affected. Xiao Hua, this old man will not rest until you die. Nangong Tianji's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He roared as he raised his hand and slapped the top of his head again. Rumbling sounds could be heard from Nangong Tianji's body. Ripples of space surged out from his body. Sharp, bird-like whistling sounds could be heard from the top of his head. Xiao Hua originally wanted to continue chasing after the 2 remaining saints of literature, but when he saw the white hair of the 2 saints of literature running away and Nangong Tianji challenging them, he stopped in the air and turned around coldly. He looked at the rapidly swaying earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky and laughed. "Won't stop until one of us dies? What a joke! Nangong Tianji, you're thinking too much. You don't have the qualifications to fight with me until one of us dies." When Nangong Tianji heard Xiao Hua's words, even though he knew that Xiao Hua was trying to provoke him, He was still so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Pooh! Nangong Tianji roared angrily. He opened his mouth again, and a 5-colored pillar of air shot out from his mouth. It shot straight up into the sky and pierced into the earth, fire, wind, and thunder. Boom! The earth, fire, wind, and thunder let out a loud explosion. Countless wind and thunder fell into the 5-colored pillar of light like a heavenly river bursting through a dam. At this moment, above Nangong Tiansun's head, a similar pillar of energy shot out. This pillar of energy wasn't 5-colored, but golden. Hundreds of millions of inscriptions surged out like golden chrysanthemums, enveloping the surrounding several hundred miles. The golden chrysanthemums were like a vast river. Wherever the earth, fire, wind, and lightning fell, all of the golden chrysanthemums transformed. Under the cover of the river, the space was completely locked down. All of the noble energy and the world's origin energy melted away. Even within Xiaohua's divine sense, the 5 elements of heaven and earth began to change. Faint rays of light began to shoot out in all directions, swaying in all directions within the space. Nangong Tianji laughed sinisterly. He watched as Xiaohua's golden body was covered by countless tiny rays of light. It was as if he had fallen into a net. He shouted proudly, "Xiaohua, today this old man will let you see what the true noble Qi River is." As Nangong Tianji's voice fell, the earth, fire, wind, and thunder in the sky turned into aurora magnetism through the golden chrysanthemum. Under the aurora magnetism, the space within 1,000 miles was filled with dazzling sparks. The entire space was filled with strange laws. Under this strange light, Xiaohua's face also revealed a strange smile. The righteous spirit river of Confucian cultivators had always been a divine ability that Xiaohua highly praised. Under the righteous spirit river, the righteous spirit would envelop the space, and any evil force would be destroyed by this righteous spirit. However, although Nangong Tianji's noble Qi River was several times stronger than an ordinary noble Qi River, even someone as strong as Xiaohua could feel the sharpness of the aurora magnetism. Xiaohua didn't doubt that if this river-like aurora magnetism fell, his golden body would definitely be riddled with holes. Even his nascent soul might not be able to escape the fate of being killed. It could be said that the noble Qi River was the true nemesis of Taoism cultivators. Unfortunately, Nangong Tianji met Xiaohua. Seeing the smile on Xiaohua's face, which contained a thick sense of ridicule, Nangong Tianji's heart thumped. He couldn't help but look into the distance. Just as Nangong Tianji felt that something was wrong, Xiaohua opened his mouth. Pooh! With a sound, the spirit-slaying sword gourd spat out from his mouth. Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, and a thick crystal light fell into the sword gourd. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The sword gourd vibrated, and the spirit-slaying sword gourd soared into the sky. When the river-like aurora magnetism came into contact with the spirit-slaying sword gourd, it immediately seemed as if it had seen a long-lost relative. It rushed in without a care for its own safety, and had long forgotten Nangong Tianji's hospitality. This is... Nangong Tianji didn't expect that Xiaohua would be able to destroy the noble spirit river that he was so proud of with just a single magical treasure. Furthermore, the vast and mighty aurora magnetism didn't listen to his command at all. It gathered into 2 thick beams of light and went against the current, pouncing towards him like a huge dragon. Damn it! Nangong Tianji was shocked. The chrysanthemum and snowflakes above his head immediately retracted, and turned into a golden chrysanthemum cloud to protect him. Roar! At this moment, Dongfang Qionghao's roar sounded in the distant sky. Nangong Tianji was overjoyed. His figure flashed, and he teleported towards that direction. Want to leave? Xiaohua sneered. He waved his right hand again, and a ray of golden light flashed in the sky like a pair of scissors. It immediately slashed across Dongfang Qionghao's illusory figure. Swoosh! The illusory figure that had already turned into a distorted light was actually cut off by the soaring dragon scissors. The right leg of the illusory figure was cut off. Boom boom. The moment the right leg left the illusory figure, it immediately collapsed, and it turned into noble qi and runes that scattered in the sky. Roar! Nangong Tianji howled in grief, but he didn't stop. He continued to rush into the distance as if he had planned this beforehand. Humph! Xiaohua snorted coldly. He raised his head and looked at the spirit-slaying sword gourd circling above his head. He then lowered his head and sneered, Since you want to destroy my fortune gate then, don't blame me for being merciless. Go. As Xiaohua raised his hand and pointed, two thick rays of spirit-slaying sword gourd turned into hundreds of thousands of light threads and crazily rained down. Countless miserable screams rang out from the sea of clouds. Each ray of light penetrated the body of an aristocratic family's disciple and directly pierced their dantian. Xiaohua wouldn't take their lives, but whether they could stay alive or not, that would depend on their own fortune. Just as Xiaohua was about to withdraw the spirit-slaying sword gourd, he heard a clear light in the distance, and another strange phenomenon appeared back to Xiaohua's battle against the Nangong family. The heaven expert flew out with his bone spear, but he was also blocked by Shimin Zhenzhong and several 9th-grade Essence Force saints. Hiss! The heaven expert swung his bone spear and raised his head to look into the distance. He roared, Shimin Zhenzhong, you are not my opponent, hurry up and get out of my way. I want to meet Dongfeng Qianghao. Hee. Shimin Zhenzhong sneered, and a cold light appeared around him. He said, your opponent is this old man, Wen Chu is Dongfeng Qianghao's opponent. Of course, if you can defeat this old man, then you can go find Dongfeng Qianghao. However, this old man wants to see the origin of a Taoist cultivator who can fight evenly with the master of the Jade Pure Palace. After saying that, Shimin Zhenzhong didn't hesitate. Inscriptions flickered all over his body, and clouds surged out. Thick, awe-inspiring qi penetrated through the fragile void and fell on his body. Boom boom boom. Shimin Zhenzhong's body trembled, and layers of sword light bloomed like flowers. Every layer of sword light was accompanied by a sword intent. It was either life and death, or austere, or bloody. This sword intent enveloped an area of several hundred li in just a moment. As this sword intent surged out, the bodies of the several saints of literature also glowed with sword light. Not to mention that their limbs were as sharp as flying swords. Even the gaze in their eyes was like a sword. Haha, so it's a sword cultivator. The heaven expert laughed and shouted, it's not like this old man hasn't fought with sword cultivators before. Come, fight with this old man for 300 rounds. As he spoke, the heaven expert's body swayed, and the bloodlight on the bone spear surged. A pitch-black demonic dragon emerged from the bone spear, roaring and pouncing towards Shimin Zhenzhong. The awe-inspiring qi of the Confucian cultivators had always been the natural nemesis of the Devil clan, but correspondingly, the devil qi and the awe-inspiring qi had been rivals since ancient times. Although Shimin Zhenzhong activated his sword intent, the demonic dragon's bloody, murderous, and violent intent rushed into Shimin Zhenzhong's defense and went straight into his heart. Give it a reward, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46:19. Seeing that the celestial was so powerful, Shimin Zhenzhong was also shocked. He thought to himself, damn it, how can this Taoist body cultivator have a demonic weapon? When he fought with the master of the Jade Pure Palace that day, he didn't use a weapon. Moreover, this demonic weapon is different from ordinary demonic weapons. The bone dragon that was refined into a demonic spear is not an ordinary dragon. The aura of this demonic weapon seems to be innately restraining the righteous aura of my Confucian cultivator. Today's battle seems to be too dangerous, far from what I expected. However, since he was already here, how could Shimin Zhenzhong hesitate? He slowly raised his right hand, and a sword light appeared in his right palm like starlight. Then, countless sword cries came from the sword light, and a sword that was overflowing with brilliance began to expand rapidly. This old man will show you what the sword essence of heaven and earth is. Shimin Zhenzhong roared proudly, and the huge sword that was 1,000 feet long fell like a falling mountain. The sword hair of the huge sword was like a flood dragon, and the sword essence was like a rainbow. Wherever it passed, the space was split open, the wind was split open, and even the eyes of the celestial were about to be split open. Near Shimin Zhenzhong, the literary saints didn't dare to be careless. They opened their mouths at the same time, and a flying sword that looked like a hook rushed out and landed on the arm of the celestial. Wherever the sword light passed, the entire arm turned into a hook. Several people cooperated with Shimin Zhenzhong, and as their bodies swayed, the hooks were like snow, attacking different parts of the celestial. Boom! In the roar, the bone spear pierced the sword light, and the sword light also split the demonic aura of the bone spear. Shimin Zhenzhong was indeed the master of the Shimin family. Wherever the sword essence of heaven and earth fell, The demonic aura was split open, and the demons hidden in the demonic aura were all split in half. In the bloody light, the body of the bone spear was revealed, and a shallow notch appeared on the scales of the bone dragon's back. The gigantic sword formed by Shimin Zhenzhong's sword beam was also swallowed by the bone dragon after it slashed down. Ka ka ka. With a crisp sound, the entire gigantic sword was shattered into pieces by the demonic light. Although each fragment struggled to transform into tens of thousands of small flying swords, before the flying swords could take form, they were shaken into inscriptions by the bone spear and scattered into the void. Ka ka ka. At the same time, several sounds of metal and stone rang out. Several sword shadows flashed past the celestial's back, waist and ribs, and a series of golden lights splashed out. Ow ow! The celestial seemed to be in pain and roared in the air. Haha, that's all there is to it. Shimin Zhenzhong looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, "This old man thought you were very powerful, but it seems that you are just a guy who is strong in appearance but weak in reality. Maybe you have succeeded in refining your body, but in this old man's eyes, your body cultivation is just like grass." As he spoke, Shimin Zhenzhong raised his hand and waved it from his waist. A thin blue light flashed, and a slender sword like an orchid appeared. Although the sword light was thin, it was very tough. When it landed in the void, it pierced through the void. What was special was that the sword was very soft, and it was like duckweed in the wind. It danced with the wind, and a sense of elegance and nobility spontaneously appeared. Shimin Zhenzhong stared at the sword, and his eyes revealed eagerness, as if he had seen his long-lost lover. For a moment, Shimin Zhenzhong raised his head and looked at the celestial who was also vigilant in his eyes. He said proudly, "The Confucian scholars of the hidden immortal continent have long admired the gentle sword, but no one has ever heard of the feather orchid immortal sword of my Shimin family. Before the feather orchid immortal sword, the so-called #1 imperial weapon is nothing but nothingness. All the families in the world know about the Son of Heaven's sword, and with the Son of Heaven's sword, you can stabilize the world. But who knows? If you control the feather orchid sword, you can become an immortal? You are very lucky to be able to see the true appearance of the feather orchid immortal sword before you die." After speaking, Shimin Zhenzhong raised his hand and waved. That sword, which was originally as soft as gossamer, suddenly gave birth to a resplendent sword light. Moreover, that sword directly soared into the sky, and an extraordinary sword intent rushed out from the sword. Wherever the sword intent passed, the broken void transformed into many orchids. Each orchid was born from the sword's splendor, and each orchid revealed a hazy world. Each orchid contained a heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating killing intent. Damn it! When the celestial saw it, he couldn't help but turn pale with fright. The celestial was formed by Xiao Hua's bone tempering. When it comes to the corporeal body, it is naturally tough and tenacious. It is very difficult for ordinary magic tools to injure him. Normally, the celestial should be the most powerful one among Xiao Hua's clones, but in fact, the celestial was the most awkward one. Previously, other than cultivating Xiao Hua's Big Dipper Fist and several bone-tempering cultivation techniques, he didn't have any other cultivation techniques. Then, in Star Moon Palace, Xiao Hua found a cultivation technique for the celestial and also found a secret technique to repair the 10,000 extinguishing heavenly dipper. However, the time was short and the celestial didn't complete it. Therefore, when facing ordinary cultivators of the lower 9th grade, the celestial had an absolute advantage. He could even deal with them more efficiently than Xiao Hua. However, when facing Shimin Zhenzhong, who was also at the upper 9th grade, he was powerless. Seeing Shimin Zhenzhong take out the feather orchid immortal sword, that bone-chilling sword light made his heart palpitate. Without hesitation, he waved his hand and summoned the celestial's white bone. When the celestial's white bone appeared, the space immediately began to flash with a pitch-black halo. A kind of rich desolate aura rushed out from the white bone. When the celestial merged with the white bone, with a loud bang, the space within 100 miles began to tremble. Waves of energy wantonly swept out and merged with the desolate aura. Ayo! The celestial looked up to the sky and roared. A fierce aura emerged from his 3 heads. Waves of sound surged towards Shimin Zhenzhong and the others. Ah! This is the ancient demon clan? Seeing that the celestial had 3 heads and 6 arms and emitted a ferocious aura that could suppress the world, Shimin Zhenzhong was astonished. He finally understood why the Celestial could fight evenly with the Jade Pure Palace Master. However, in the blink of an eye, Shimin Zhenzhong sneered. Suddenly, tens of thousands of sword hairs appeared around his body. These sword hairs all rushed into the treasured sword in his hand. The slender treasured sword overflowed with brilliance like the rising sun. As Shimin Zhenzhong waved his hands, the seemingly slender treasured sword fell down like a meteor. Amidst the huge rumbling sound, the space habitually shattered and collapsed. The orchid sword hairs from before floated down and pounced on the Celestial. The treasured sword was still far from the Celestial. In the sky above the Celestial's head, pa pa pa, sounds of explosions suddenly sounded. Countless mighty pillars of chi were extinguished, and thumb-sized protrusions appeared around the Celestial. Looking at the other four sides of the sword light, the figures of the several saints of literature had already turned into swords and flew up like orchids. The sword intent that was several times stronger than before also pierced through the void and fell toward the back of the celestial being. The demon-devouring spear is invincible. Kill Buddha if it meets Buddha. Slay immortals if it meets immortals. The celestial laughed boldly. You are just immortal ascension swords. How can you be a match for me? Roar. The celestial opened his mouth and 3 pillars of light rushed out, passing through the sword chi and landing on Shimin Zhenzhong's head. The bone spear in his hand, under the stimulation of the desolate chi, turned into a demon dragon that was thousands of feet long and crazily expanded to meet the treasured swords. Seeing the 3 pillars of light fall, Shimin Zhenzhong did not care because the true chi around his body had already turned into sword hair and merged with the treasured swords. The Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword would naturally block the light pillars. However, contrary to Shimin Zhenzhong's expectations, the Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword did not block the light pillars when they passed through the sword light. And in the light pillars, Shimin Zhenzhong felt that his essence, chi, and spirit were about to leave his body. Not good. Shimin Zhenzhong knew that things were not good and hurriedly urged his true chi to block the attacks of the 3 pillars of light. Shimin Zhenzhong was distracted and the bone spear collided with the treasured swords again. The treasured swords shone brightly and the sword's momentum was like a wave. The bone spear's demonic chi soared into the sky and the spear's intent was like 1,000 caddies. The space within hundreds of miles shook at this moment. The worlds created by the sword hair were destroyed by the demonic chi, and the blood waves created by the demonic chi were also wiped out by the sword hair. This huge collision produced a vast impact. Not only did it blow away the flying swords that Shimin Zhenzhong had transformed into, it also caused the corporeal body of the celestial being with 3 heads and 6 arms to tumble. Clang, clang, clang. As he tumbled, the sounds of swords humming could be heard. The flying swords that were formed by the sage of literature had slashed through the void and slashed at the celestial being's back. Out of the celestial being's expectations, several deep sword marks appeared on his back, and the eerie white bones were revealed in the sword marks. Roar. The celestial being roared. Other than the 2 hands that were holding the spear, the other 4 arms suddenly reached into the void. At the same time, the 3 heads opened their mouths and shot 3 pillars of light at the sage of literature who was closest to them. Dodge! Shimin Zhenzhong's flying sword was raised, and his figure was naturally blocked. He saw the celestial being's arms falling into the void and immediately felt that something was wrong, so he hurriedly shouted. Moreover, he bent his body and forcefully channeled his sword. The sword turned into a ray of light and also disappeared into the void. The sage of literature who received the warning were alarmed and quickly dodged. Crack, crack, crack. Just as they were about to dodge, the celestial being's 4 arms reached out from the void and hit their shadows. With a crisp sound, several sword rays were shot down, and the sage of literature's secondary bodies were also slightly shattered. However, the sage of literature who was closest to the celestial was not so lucky. The 3 pillars of light worked together and struck the sage of literature's sword rays with lightning speed. The sage of literature didn't even have time to scream before the brilliance of his secondary body was instantly extinguished, and he fell from the sky. Poof! The celestial being succeeded, but Shimin Zhenzhong's Feather Orchid Immortal Ascension Sword also arrived at the same time. This sword that was even thinner than a thin thread easily pierced the celestial's heart and almost came out of his body. Good. The sage of literature couldn't help but cheer when he saw the celestial being stabbed. At this time, boom, boom. Behind the sage of literature, a violent wind suddenly rose. The celestial's hands that were holding the spear had unknowingly abandoned it, and were now reaching out from the void and grabbing the backs of two sage of literatures. The two bloody hands even came out from the chests of two sage of literatures. Give it a tip, and thank you for all forms of support. Chapter 46-20. The Celestial's other two legs didn't stay idle either. Like Xianxia, he kicked the other two literary saints in the back. After the two literary saints' backs caved in, they fell from the sky. Damn it! Jianghu couldn't help but gnash his teeth when he saw the Celestial kill 5 literary saints right in front of him. However, what surprised him even more was that there was no blood flowing out from where the feather orchid immortal sword pierced. The Celestial only gritted his teeth in pain but didn't seem to be killed at all. He growled, You. The Celestial sneered and grabbed the sword in his chest. Can't you see that I have 3 heads and 6 arms? I have 3 hearts. The Celestial grabbed the sword and thunder rumbled. The entire feather orchid immortal sword was controlled by lightning. Jianghu was shocked. He hurriedly waved his right hand and the flexible sword in the lightning turned into nothingness. Roar! At the same time, Dongfeng Qionghao's roar came from the distant sky. Jianghu was startled. He looked at the remaining literary saint and teleported toward him. Haha! Seeing Jianghu escape, the Celestial didn't chase after him. Instead, he looked at that panic-stricken literary sage and strode towards him. You. Don't come here. That literary sage was extremely scared and actually screamed like a weak girl. The Thunderbolt Immortal saw that Xianxia and the Celestial both had opponents. He smiled at Dongfeng Qiongao and said, Old Dongfeng, are you going to pick I as your opponent? Ha ha. Dongfeng Qiongao looked up to the sky and laughed. The Thunder Immortal is very famous. He killed many of our Confucian cultivators in the soaring Dragon Mountain range. This old man shrank back when I saw the lightning. I didn't dare to fight the Immortal. Your opponent is Baiming Cho Qing. Dongfeng Qionghao's eyes flashed with golden light. He looked at Wen Chu and said, Literary Star Palace Master, can you fight with me? Fight. Wen Chu's expression did not change, but a complicated emotion flashed in his eyes as he replied. Watching Wen Chu, Dongfeng Qiongao, and the others fly away, Thunderbolt Immortal looked at Baiming Chui Qing and the other literary sages in the distance. He crooked his neck and laughed. Baiming Chui Qing? Such a name seems to be very cultured, but looking at your excellency's appearance, it really has nothing to do with that. A tasteless Confucian cultivator like you. How could you possibly be a match for me? The Baiming family used plum blossoms as their symbol, so they naturally emphasized elegance and taste. However, Baiming Chui Qing and even Baiming Jiqing had put on weight, especially Baiming Chui Qing. Although her face was delicate and pretty, if she were to put on an official's attire, she would look more like an ordinary village official. How could she have the demeanor of the patriarch of the 4 great families whose name shook the world? Previously, Baiming Chaoqing had also used a cultivation method to temper her corporeal body, but she originally had this kind of physique. Admittedly, the cultivation method had a certain effect, but how could it be more convenient than transfiguration? However, if she transfigure her body, Baiming Chui Qing would be somewhat disdainful. Therefore, Baiming Chui Qing had always considered herself a beauty. Of course, no one in the world dared to expose Baiming Chui Qing's freckles. Today, Thunderbolt Immortal exposed her. How could Baiming Chui Qing not be angry? Baiming Chui Qing roared, Old Thunderbolt Immortal. Don't think that you're invincible just because you killed a few literary sages of the mysterious Yellow Order. Today, I swear I'll kill you on the spot. You see, I just said you have no taste, and now you're throwing away the hypocrisy of a Confucian cultivator. The mischievous Thunderbolt Immortal was not anxious at all. He was all smiles as he said, We've only just talked about superficial appearances, we haven't touched on the heart yet. Do you want me to boil some chicken soup for you to try, to make up for what you lack? Without waiting for Thunderbolt Immortal to finish speaking, Baiming Chui Qing raised her hand and patted the top of her head. Boom! 5-colored true qi gushed out, running straight through heaven and earth. The 5-colored true qi of the 4 great clans was naturally modeled, and so was Baiming Chui Qing's. However, within this soaring true qi pillar, the modeled true qi was azure, like plum blossoms. Woo! Once the 5-colored true qi pillar appeared, the space within several hundred li shook. countless true chi pillars fell from the sky, and when the 5-colored true chi pillar enveloped the space within several hundred li like a fountain, those plum blossoms flickered with blue color and drifted down in the air. It was truly dazzling, truly beautiful. Looking at those literary sages of the 9th grade elemental energy, they also each stood in a corner, releasing their heterogeneous 5-colored true chi, trapping the thunderbolt immortal from the bottom. Moreover, when the 5-colored true chi gushed out, the figures of those literary sages also disappeared. Good, it's really not bad. The thunderbolt immortal was not anxious. He pinched his chin with his hand, with a rather elegant demeanor, and said with a smile, "It looks too beautiful to be absorbed all at once. However, when displayed by a person as fat as a pig like you, no matter how you look at it, there are some flaws. Sigh, what can I do, what can I do?" After saying that, the thunderbolt immortal rubbed his hands slightly, blinked his eyes and said, "Such a beautiful painting, let this old man add the finishing touch." When Bai Ming Cui Qing heard that, she was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She stood in the air and said coldly, "Since that's the case, then please raise your brush and correct it. I hope you don't talk too big, or your teeth will fall out." Hee hee. In the thunderbolt immortal's hand, clusters of lightning slowly emerged. He still had a smile on his face as he replied, "Although this old man doesn't have Taoist sorcerer's brush, and can't use the wondrous blossom brush, it's more than enough to correct your vulgarity. As for my teeth, please don't worry. This old man's age hasn't reached the point where my teeth will fall out, so we can't be mentioned in the same breath." After saying that, the thunderbolt immortal waved his hands, and tens of thousands of thunderbolts appeared out of thin air, transforming into the shapes of brushes, and pointed towards the plum blossoms in the air at the same time. This thunderbolt was like a huge wave overturning the sky, overturning the entire space, and its momentum was incomparably vast. However, all the thunderbolts had only rushed out 100 feet when the countless plum blossoms in the air suddenly produced indescribable fluctuations. These fluctuations were like a net, intertwining and falling. Wherever the fluctuations passed, all the thunderbolts immediately ceased to exist, turning into nothingness. So much so that when the fluctuations landed on the thunderbolt immortal's body, even the lightning flashing around the thunderbolt immortal's body was also smoothed out. The thunderbolt immortal was dumbstruck. Looking at those plum blossoms, they were like Bai Ming Cui Qing's small eyes that were mocking him. Ha ha! Bai Ming Cui Qing laughed wildly. "It's just the Dao Sex thunderbolt technique. What's there to be arrogant about? Didn't you want to correct this old man's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram? Why don't you pick up your lightning brush? Without it, I'm afraid your teeth will fall out." Damn it! The thunderbolt immortal was ashamed and angry. He raised his hand and slapped the top of his head. Rumble! A cluster of lightning spurted out, transforming into a thunderbolt technique that grabbed towards Bai Ming Cui Qing. Unfortunately, as soon as the lightning appeared, the fluctuations rose again. That thunderbolt technique whimpered as it shrank and disappeared, not causing any waves at all. "Since you don't have the strength to lift the brush, then let this old man do it." Bai Ming Cui Qing was in high spirits. She opened her mouth and a mouthful of life's true energy gushed out, transforming into countless fine threads that were similar to inscription chains. At the same time, they entered the void and connected all the plum blossoms together. Fall! When Bai Ming Cui Qing shouted, a huge azure inscription was spurted out from her mouth, falling in mid-air and exploding with a loud bang. Tens of thousands of plum blossoms spiraled and flashed, gushing over from all directions. That indescribable fluctuation transformed into an invisible lotus shape, trapping the thunderbolt immortal. As soon as the lotus shape was formed, the thunderbolt immortal could not perceive the situation outside the space. He only felt a cluster of misty green halos covering the area around him. He could not use his divine thoughts, the chi of heaven and earth was isolated, and even the void was imprisoned. Not good. The thunderbolt immortal was shocked and hurriedly wanted to urge the sound of thunder. However, just as he was about to urge his magic power, he suddenly frowned again. That's not right. The thunderbolt immortal narrowed his eyes and looked at the illusory green light around him. He thought to himself, the Bai Ming family is one of the 4 great families of Confucian cultivators. How can there be the aura of Taoist magic in his green light? Although this aura is very subtle, I was born to report Taoism. How can I not detect it? It's really weird. Just as the Thunderbolt Immortal was puzzled, the fluctuating aura became more and more intense, and a destructive momentum surged in the entire space. Haha. After being surprised, the Thunderbolt Immortal laughed out loud. He raised his hand and made a rare hand seal. He said, although this old man is called the Thunderbolt Immortal and the Thunderbolt technique is naturally this old man's strongest technique, don't you think you're being too delusional if you want to imprison this old man with merely the Winter Plum Forbidden Lightning diagram? Immediately, the Thunderbolt Immortal made a gesture and a bean-sized lamp appeared in mid-air. This lamp was divided into 6 colors, which was exactly the same as Xiaohua's 6-colored spiritual fire. Old man Baiming, you fat toad at the bottom of a well. Today, I'll let you see the power of my Taoist magic. The Thunderbolt Immortal shouted. Break. Following the Thunderbolt Immortal's finger, a thick crystal light fell into the lamp. The 6-colored spiritual fire instantly turned into a several zhang large fire pillar and directly penetrated the Thunderbolt Immortal's feet. The spiritual fire was the absolute weapon that Xiaohua used before he reached the nascent soul stage. Once the spiritual fire was used, it was invincible. However, because the spiritual fire consumed too much magic power, Xiaohua would never use it unless he had no other choice. When Xiaohua reached the 9th grade of origin energy, there were too many methods that he could use. Therefore, although the spiritual fire had already become 6-colored, Xiaohua basically didn't use it anymore. The Thunderbolt Immortal naturally knew the power of the 6-colored spiritual fire. While he was cultivating the Thunderbolt technique, he was also pondering how to refine the 6-colored spiritual fire. The incantation that he was using now was a spell that used the 6-colored spiritual fire as the seed and his own magic power as the supplement. This spell was purely of the fire attribute and didn't consume much magic power. Normally, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't have the opportunity to use this spell. Since he was forced to this place by Baiming Chuqing, he just happened to witness the power of this fire attribute spell. Chapter 46-21. Puff. A muffled sound that wasn't particularly loud rang out. The place where the fire pillar landed, the misty blue illusion was pierced through. Under the fire pillar, the hundreds of plum blossom clouds vanished. The forbidden thunder diagram of the winter plum blossom had been easily destroyed by the Thunder Immortal. What kind of fire is this? Baiming Chuqing looked at the fire pillar in a daze and cried out, how can an ordinary fire break my green lotus? At this point, Baiming Chuqing's expression changed greatly. He hurriedly raised his hand and grabbed. A huge hand of several miles in size fell from the sky. He shouted angrily, damn it! How can you bully the weak like this? Seeing that the fire pillar had broken through the imprisonment, the Thunderbolt Immortal's figure swayed and immediately landed at the floor. He reached his hand into the fire pillar. Then, without hesitation, the Thunderbolt Immortal flipped his hands and several fire spears separated from the fire pillar. Whoa! The Thunderbolt Immortal raised his hand again. Several fire spears fell into the void and disappeared in a flash. Almost at the same time, several plum blossoms disappeared where the fire spears landed. Miserable shrieks rang out in the air as several literary saints appeared in the void. Each of them had a fire spear stabbed into their chest. Although the fire spears were not enough to kill the literary saints on the spot, the 6-colored spiritual fire ignited their true chi and bodies. Even the surrounding void was about to be ignited. Haha! The Thunderbolt Immortal laughed. I'll send these eyesores back to their hometown first. Then I'll tell you what elegance is. Huff! At this time, Baiming Chuqing's huge hand fell. Where the true chi fell, the 6-colored spiritual fire did not extinguish. Instead, it went against the flow and ignited Baiming Chuqing's huge hand. Damn it. Baiming Chuqing was shocked. She cursed and decisively cut her wrist. With a swoosh, she threw the huge hand away. Just as Baiming Chuqing was about to use another magical power, Dongfeng Qionghao's voice came from afar. Baiming Chuqing glared at the Thunderbolt Immortal fiercely. Her figure turned into a plum blossom shadow and disappeared instantly. TCH. The Thunderbolt Immortal shouted disdainfully. She really has no manners. She escaped without even saying goodbye. Then, the Thunderbolt Immortal did not even look at the literary sages who were burned by the spiritual fire and chased after them. In order to avoid Baiming Chuqing's winter plum forbidden lightning diagram, Dongfeng Qionghao's figure flickered and lured Wen Chu to another high altitude. At this moment, Chao Mu Ya's heavenly light split in two, and the sky was once again covered in a faint greenish gray. Layers of earth, fire, wind, and lightning roared in the sky, and the clouds that approached Chao Mu Ya were shattered into pieces. Wen Chu landed and looked at Dongfeng Qianghao, who was on guard in the distance. His eyes flashed with worry. He looked around and sighed. We Confucians have written many poems. Other than Immortals at the Magpie Bridge, this old man likes Song of Tomorrow the most. Then, Wen Chu didn't dare to look at Dongfeng Qionghao's confusion. He started to recite, "Tomorrow comes after tomorrow, how many tomorrows are there? I am waiting for tomorrow, and all things are wasted. If the people of the world are tired by tomorrow, spring will pass and autumn will come, and the old will come." In the morning, he looked at the east-flowing water. In the evening, he looked at the west-setting sun. How much could tomorrow be in 100 years? Please listen to my Song of Tomorrow. When he finished reciting, Wen Chu continued, "Looking at Chao Mu Ya, this old man suddenly feels that time is passing quickly. Day after day, day after day, day after day, day after day. A day is but a blink of an eye. How much time is there in a person's life? Why do we not do meaningful things and only do boring things?" Dongfeng Qianghao naturally didn't know that Wen Chu's feelings had just been born, and he was looking at the world with his own ignorant eyes. However, when he saw that Wen Chu didn't make a move, he waved his hand, and the literary sages disappeared and landed in various places. The master of Wen Chu Palace is quite refined. Dongfeng Qianghao smiled. Although this old man has never seen you before, I know that you are a refined person after seeing you today. You are completely different from that bastard Gauchen. However, to be honest, I, Jianzhong, and the others might not be any better than Gauchen. Perhaps we were like you in our early years, and we used to make tea with clear spring water and red mud to make wine. However, now that we are in your position, we have already treated our previous lives as our ideal." At this point, Dongfeng Qianghao sighed. Actually, sometimes this old man also wants to be like you, to throw away these shackles, or to find a desolate mountain to cultivate in peace, or to find Gauchen to become the master of some palace and live a leisurely life. However, if this old man takes half a step back, others will take a step forward. My Dongfeng family's thousands of years of foundation may become someone else's. This old man has taken over this heavy responsibility from my ancestors, and I can't slack off. My fate has already been decided when I took over the position of master. To be honest, this old man doesn't think that the four great families will win today's battle. Wen Chu retracted his gaze and looked at the disciples who were fighting beneath his feet. He said, "You don't know enlightened Master Zhao's background at all. Don't you think that it's not worth it to make both sides suffer for the 5 Qis unification art? There are some things that must be done. Even if the price is high, this old man will still do it." Dongfeng Qianghao replied. "However, there are some things that cannot be done. Even if there is no price, this old man will not do them. The 5 Qis unification art is extremely important to our 4 clans. We must obtain it at all costs." Wen Chu sneered. "If this old man told you that you didn't need to do so much, you wouldn't need to set up such a trap. This old man already told you when I gave the 5 Qis unification art to Immortal Emperor Gauchen. I'm returning it to the Confucian cultivators, not the Immortal palaces. It won't be long before the 5 Qis unification art is made public on hidden Immortal continent." Dongfeng Qianghao was stunned and did not say anything for a long time. He stared at Wen Chu as if he was thinking about the validity of Wen Chu's words. However, Dongfeng Qianghao spoke again. "I believe your words. However, I don't believe the Gauchen. Or rather, I don't believe that the Gauchen would give the 5 Qis unification art to our 4 clans and the 100 schools of philosophers for no reason. Moreover, I can tell you with certainty that if you don't make the 5 Qis unification art public, then your so-called return of the 5 Qis unification art to the Confucian cultivators is nothing more than a joke. You're only using the 5 Qis unification art to give yourself the title of Confucian Immortal Master, the master of the Literature Star Palace." Wen Chu shrugged helplessly. "This is all I can do. You can do even more." Dongfeng Qianghao smiled. "You can give the 5 Qis unification art to our 4 clans and work together with us." Dongfeng Qianghao hesitated for a moment before continuing. I can even promise you that if possible, our 4 clans can recommend you to be the immortal emperor of the immortal palaces. When Chu knew that Dongfeng Qianghao was trying to bewitch him, he shook his head. How can I be the immortal emperor with my temperament? If I wanted to, why would I give the 5 cheese unification art to immortal Emperor Gaochen? Dongfeng Qianghao remained silent. When Chu pondered for a moment before continuing. When I gave the 5 cheese unification art to immortal Emperor Gaochen, we had an agreement. That's why I can't give the 5 cheese unification art to the 4 clans. However, if the 4 clans agree, I'll discuss it with Taoist Master Xiao and come up with a foolproof plan. Although Wen Chu didn't say that Xiao Hua could give the 5 cheese unification technique to the 4 great families, Dongfeng Qianghao knew from Dongfeng Yushan that Xiao Hua also knew the 5 cheese unification technique, so he understood. However, Dongfeng Qianghao rejected Wen Chu's offer and shook his head. There's no turning back now. Unless Taoist Master Xiao hands over the 5 cheese unification art now. That's why. Wen Chu smiled wryly. Even if you know this is immortal Emperor Gaochen's plan, you still have to step in. Yes. There are many things in this world that are beyond one's control. Dongfeng Qianghao nodded. Just like now, I know you're a gentleman and want to befriend you, but I still have to think of a way to capture you. As he spoke, Dongfeng Qianghao slapped the top of his head, and a large crystal-clear multicolored hand appeared out of thin air and grabbed at him. Wen Chu also unleashed a 5-colored hand. Although the hand was not solid, its color was pure, and as it passed, Dongfeng Qianghao's shackles were swept away. Wen Chu sighed. When it comes to Confucian techniques, you are no match for me. Boom! Wen Chu's hand clashed with Dongfeng Qianghao's. Under the huge force, Dongfeng Qianghao's hand crumbled into pieces of runes while Wen Chu's hand was still there and quickly restored. Dongfeng Qianghao wasn't surprised at all. He narrowed his eyes and said, "It's too early to talk about this." Sure enough, at the place where the 5-colored hands landed, a green bamboo shoot appeared. Puff! Dongfeng Qianghao's true qi flowed into the bamboo shoot and it suddenly turned into a huge bamboo tree. It was green and glistening. This is... Wen Chu didn't understand. The hand that hadn't recovered reached out again. Whoa! Wherever Wen Chu's large hand landed, the bamboo swiftly turned into a grayish-yellow color. Numerous pale yellow bamboo flowers slowly grew on them. Once these bamboo flowers were revealed, inscriptions suddenly appeared in the previously untraceable sky. These inscriptions faded under the pale yellow color of the bamboo flowers, transforming into numerous colorless bamboo flowers. A faint aura of death quickly spread around. Wen Chu raised an eyebrow. He seemed to understand something. Whoosh! Tens of thousands of colorless flowers suddenly bloomed and Wen Chu's hand withered. All of his true qi flowed into the flowers. At the same time, the aura of death surged towards Wen Chu like a tidal wave. Wen Chu activated his true qi and the 5-colored light quickly faded under the aura of death. The inscriptions were wiped out by the aura of death. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support. Chapter 46-22. Your Excellency, there's no need to struggle. Only by handing over the 5 cheese unifications will you be able to avoid becoming a skeleton. Dongfeng Qianghao said with pride. Otherwise, only death awaits you. Wen Chu let out a long laugh and pointed at the blooming bamboo flowers and the surging death aura. He said in a clear voice, although the blooming of bamboo represents the withering of bamboo, it is still the birth of bamboo flowers and the birth of new bamboo. We Confucian cultivators focus on life. We cultivate the power of life. You don't understand. You've gone astray. You only see death and ignore life. How can this kind of death trap this old man? As he spoke, Wen Chu opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of refined life energy from his dantian. Whoosh! Like a spring breeze, the entire space was immediately filled with layers of bright green. In this bright green aura, all the death energy seemed to be boiling and bubbling. In just a moment, all the bubbles fell into the light yellow bamboo flowers. The bamboo flowers disappeared, and one by one, thumb-sized bamboo shoots were revealed. Dongfeng Qianghao sucked in a cold breath. He knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's Confucian divine abilities. Wen Chu's hand was still alive, and his hand was still alive. His hand touched the bamboo shoots and withered flowers. Dongfang Qianghao knew he had underestimated Wen Chu's divine ability. Sigh. Dongfang Qianghao sighed again. He took out an ancient ruler and said, "Actually, this old man really didn't want to come to this step." As he spoke, Dongfang Qianghao waved the ruler. A stern and heavy aura came from the ruler. Along with this aura, there was the sound of tens of thousands of children chanting. It was as if the entire world had become a huge school. When Chu became a student in this school, the ferrule slowly fell down, and countless inscriptions flew out from the ferrule. They flashed in the air and made a sound. A voice that resounded through the heavens and earth rang out amidst the chanting of the 10,000 children. "A teacher teaches and dispels doubts." The moment this voice came out, the chanting stopped abruptly. Yes. This voice was like all living beings bowing their heads. As a Confucian cultivator, Wen Chu felt an irresistible silence in his heart. He was about to bow his head before this respectful teacher. The ruler fell down like a mountain and was about to land on Wen Chu's forehead. Boom. At this critical moment, Wen Chu's head spat out 5-colored qi. The heaven and earth pagoda flew out and blocked the ruler. The almost unparalleled power landed on the heaven and earth pagoda. The heaven and earth pagoda roared and a surge of heaven and earth Tao rushed out. Not only did it block the heaven and earth Tao, but the heaven and earth Tao also counterattacked Dongfang Qianghao's subbody. Dongfang Qianghao's subbody was destroyed. Heaven and earth pagoda? Yeah. How do you have such a wondrous item? Dongfang Qianghao's face was pale as he looked at the heaven and earth pagoda above Wen Chu's head in disbelief. Wen Chu sneered. "Don't you also have the saint ruler? Unfortunately, you used the heaven and earth Tao against my Confucian cultivator. I'm afraid you won't be able to ascend in this life." Humph. Dongfang Qianghao snorted and said, "Even if this old man's body is destroyed, I won't let you join the North Star." Roar. Dongfang Qianghao roared and the sound waves spread in all directions. Dongfang Qianghao raised his hand and the sound waves landed between his eyebrows. Shwa. A clear light appeared between Dongfang Qianghao's eyebrows. Words flew out and formed lines of poems in the air. The lines of poems condensed into articles, and the articles condensed into scrolls. When the scrolls opened, a soft voice sounded. Although the voice was soft, it was deafening to Wen Chu's ears. Wen Chu was confused at first, but when the voice recited a few lines, Wen Chu's forehead shone with a clear light. Wen Chu suddenly realized what was going on. However, before Wen Chu could do anything, four distorted figures flashed in the sky. Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chuqing arrived at the same time. The three of them stood in the air and raised their hands to point at their own forehead. Similar clear light spurted out and shrouded the surrounding hundreds of miles. 4 layers of clear light fell, and another strange phenomenon appeared. In the sky within hundreds of miles, endless auspicious clouds and multicolored light appeared. Within the auspicious clouds and multicolored light, there seemed to be many illusory figures. Behind these illusory figures, there were all kinds of strange phenomena, such as dragons and phoenixes, abundant grains, picturesque territories, and so on. Xianxia, the thunderbolt immortal, and the celestial being naturally chased after them. However, this clear light was so mysterious that not only did it block the figures of Xianxia and the others, even their divine senses couldn't penetrate it. Damn it! Xianxia narrowed his eyes and cursed in a low voice. He raised his hand and patted the top of his head. A 5-colored big hand was about to grab him. Boom! Just at this time, a huge vibration occurred in the sky. Like a huge wave, a fluctuation emerged from the clear light. Xiaohua's 5-colored big hand was instantly shaken into powder. When the light became clear again, the hidden clouds had already disappeared, revealing the situation inside. At this time, inside the clear light, 4 voices recited the scrolls at the same time. The voices were different, and the accents were different. However, where the voices fell, the scrolls began to gather, vibrate, and transform. The mountain of books and the sea of literature swayed, and 4 similar but actually different Wen Chu stars were born from the scrolls. These stars looked somewhat blurry and even somewhat broken, but the Wen Chu aura inside the stars was very strong. Disciple respectfully invites the sage. The 4 family heads bowed at the same time. Another pillar of 5-colored true energy mixed with essence blood fell into the Wen Chu star. Ka 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 ka. 4 clear shattering sounds came from the sky. as the 4 Wenchu stars shattered, for sages with only half of their bodies were revealed. The moment this saint appeared, tens of thousands of auspicious clouds covered the sky, and thousands of rays of light shone. The sound of the 100 heavy suns rang out, and 10 thunderbolts descended. In this saint's hand, there was another beautiful ink brush. Seeing this, Xianxia, who was about to use his divine ability again, smiled. He crossed his arms and coldly stood there, quietly watching. When the 4 sages appeared, Dongfang Qianghao looked at Shimin Zhenzhong. The 2 of them exchanged glances and their bodies moved. As the 2 of them moved, the 2 sages above their heads merged and formed a complete sage. Xianxia, who was originally hugging the scrolls to watch the show, suddenly trembled and cried out, "Lao! Lao Tzu?" Because in the ancient books of Confucianism, it was very clear that Lao Tzu had taught Confucius and could be said to be Confucius' teacher. However, Lao Tzu's disciples and inheritance were not found in the 100 schools of thought. Even when Wen Chu became a Wenchu star, Lao Tzu's figure was not found in the sages Wen Chu. Lao Tzu could be said to be a sage who had disappeared. No one knew where Lao Tzu had gone. However, at this moment, Xianxia actually saw Lao Tzu's sage statue in this place. Xianxia really did not expect that the so-called 4 great families were actually Lao Tzu's descendants and inheritance. Xianxia was surprised. The 2 sages above Nangong Tianji and Baiming Chuqing's heads were also working together. As Xianxia expected, it was another Lao Tzu sage statue. These 2 Lao Tzu sage statues looked exactly the same, but their auras were different. Even the holy sounds coming from their mouths and the holy brushes in their hands were different. Alas! Seeing the 2 Lao Tzu sage statues, Wen Chu sighed and said, "Sins committed by the heavens can be forgiven, but sins committed by oneself are the hardest to bear." Then, Wen Chu pointed at the spot between his eyebrows. Swoosh! The same strange phenomenon appeared, but the Wen Chu star that rushed out of Wen Chu's eyebrows was unusually clear, and even the fine lines on it were clear. Wen Chu bowed and said, "Disciple invites the sages to show themselves." Then, without Wen Chu activating his blood essence, the sages who had experienced the sages Wen Chu's sage statues in the ruins appeared again. These sages' sage statues were different. Some of them were human cultivators standing proudly with tall hats and broad belts, and some of them were human warriors standing alone in the wind with golden helmets and silver armors. In their hands, some of them were writing down historical records that had never been recorded, and some of them were writing down memories that had never been recorded in their weapons. No way, right? Dongfang Qianghao, Shimin Zhenzhong, Nangong Tian, and Baiming Chuqing looked at each other in dismay. Their eyes were wide open, and they cried out in shock. Their mouths were opened so wide that several goose eggs could be stuffed in. At this moment, the 2 Lao Tzu sage statues moved. 2 ink brushes pointed at the sages, and they shouted in the air, "The Tao that can be said, is not the Tao." Under the ink brushes, the sages shouted in unison, "The name that can be named, is not the name of the Hangu Pass." As the sages chanted, the sages' brushes also pointed out. Where the inexplicable waves and light and shadow collided, the 2 Lao Tzu sage statues turned into fragments. The clear light that enveloped 1,000 miles of space wrapped these fragments and returned to the spots between the eyebrows of the 4 clan masters. When the clear light revealed their figures, the 4 clan masters staggered and almost fell from the sky. They looked at Wen Chu in extreme horror, and their lips trembled. They didn't know what to say. This was because they knew very well that with the prosperity of the human race, education was hard to come by. On the hidden Immortal continent, there were many sage scholars, but very few sage scholars. This was because it was too difficult for the sages to choose Wen Chu. Even the powerful Immortal Palace and the 4 clan masters could only activate 1 sage, or even half a sage, to point out the outline of Wen Chu. Although they could step into the realm of sage scholars, the so-called sage scholars were no longer true sage scholars. They could only be called half-sage scholars, or quasi-sage scholars. Chapter 46-23. The clan masters of the 4 clans were not lacking in their calculations. They activated the holy statues and prepared to use 2 of the holy statues to kill Wen Chu's holy statue. From what they knew, Wen Chu was most likely a half-saint literary star like them. At best, he could be a complete literary star. They had 2 holy statues, so they had an absolute advantage. So much so that they even indulged in the wildest fantasy that even if Wen and Chu were double Saint Wen stars, their lousy holy statues were absolutely stronger than Wen and Chu's Saint Wen star. However, they never thought that Wen Chu was actually a double Saint literary star. He could even be called a 10,000 Saint literary star. How could their holy statues be a match for him? They had lifted a rock and smashed it on their own feet. Haha, give me your life. Seeing this, the Celestial laughed and waved his bone spear, about to rush over. Rumble. At this moment, something strange happened again. Dark clouds appeared where the earth, fire, wind, and thunder had been. Wave after wave of darkness covered the entire sky. Within the darkness, thousands of specks of starlight came crashing down with the power of the stars and moon. Within a few thousand miles, the space was sealed. Essence energy below the 8th level was like a heavy burden. Not to mention flying, even standing in the air was difficult. Immortal Palace Star River. Immortal Palace Star River. Dongfeng Qionghao's face was ferocious. He pointed at the sky and shouted crazily, "Master Xiao Lei, Master of Literature Palace, take a good look. This is Gao Chen's scheme, and also his dark methods. He will only hide behind the scenes and wait for us to fight to the death. Then, he will come and reap the benefits." After that, Dongfeng Qionghao and the other three took out their garrison orders, garrison flags, troop gathering drums, and troop collecting gongs. It seemed like they were going to collect the disciples of the 4 great families in the abyss. Damn it! Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense and immediately knew that the Immortal Palace Star River not only had the Star River sand refined by the great craftsmen of the Immortal Palace Star River, but there was also the Khanate heavy water. Although this momentum was not as strong as the heavenly demon's destruction of the world in the ruins, the momentum was much stronger. Xiao Hua didn't dare to delay. He raised his hand and handed the Kunlun mirror to the Celestial. He said, "Please." "All right." The Celestial looked at the river of stars that filled the sky and poured down. With a loud roar, he took the Kunlun mirror and was about to fly down. Woo-woo. In this world, below everyone, 4 figures appeared. Dongfeng Qionghao, Shimen Jianzhong, Nangong Tianji, and Baiming Chuqing's figures distorted and crashed into the void. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared. Damn it! The patriarchs of the 4 great clans actually fled at the last minute and abandoned their disciples? The Celestials stared blankly at the abyss. Most of the hundreds of thousands of disciples from the 4 great clans were injured, and none of them had been taken into the hidden weapon flag or any other imperial equipment. The Celestial didn't know what to do and shouted, "Fellow Taoist, what should we do now?" At this moment, the heavenly heavy water had already covered the sky and covered the earth. The stellar river sand carried the power of the stars as it poured down in a destructive manner. The void shattered, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Chao Muya was once again in a state of apocalypse. "Withdraw!" Xiao Hua shouted without any hesitation, "First accept Fortune Gate disciples, then the 4 families' disciples." Yes. Hearing this, the Celestial controlled the Kunlun mirror and rushed into the abyss. Xiao Hua soared into the sky and shouted again, "Fellow Taoist Wen Chu, quickly summon the Mountain River Seal or the Heaven and Earth Pagoda and help the Celestial to accept disciples. I will absorb the heavenly heavy water." Unfortunately, Wen Chu turned a deaf ear to Xiao Hua's words and only stared at the heavenly palace galaxy with a complicated expression. Damn it! Xiao Hua cursed inwardly. Why do things always go wrong at the crucial moment? "Fellow Taoist Celestial!" Xiao Hua hurriedly shouted. "Quickly release fellow Taoist Feng Wu." All right. The Celestial naturally knew that Xiao Hua was trying to hide something, so he responded and casually activated the Kunlun mirror. Boom. Within the pillar of light, the Phoenix parasol spread its wings and flew out. The power of the stars and moon surged out and swept towards the galaxy. At the same time, the star runes around the Phoenix parasol's body appeared again. The void was torn apart and countless pillars of light descended. A huge phantom of a phoenix that was 1,000 miles long condensed on the Phoenix parasol's body. As it spread its wings, the power of the stars and moon that was even more powerful than the falling galaxy rushed into the sky again. "Starry sky, great sage?" All of a sudden, a clear and melodious voice rang out in the midst of the starry night. A woman dressed in palace attire flashed past the pitch-black darkness. "Fellow Taoist lightning." Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed. He swept his gaze across the galaxy and ordered, Go and see who is causing trouble here. Haha, don't worry. The lightning sage turned into lightning and rushed into the sky, shouting, I love to destroy flowers. At this time, the innate heavy water had already fallen. Feng Wu used the power of the stars and moon to block the stellar river sand, but she couldn't stop the heavy water. Xiao Hua released his consciousness and covered 1,000 miles, absorbing the heavy water into the Shanhua continent. The Immortal Palace's galaxy seemed to be boundless, and the stellar river sand seemed to be innumerable. Xiao Hua and Feng Wu didn't dare to be careless and tried their best to collect the heavy water. The Celestial was below them, controlling the Kunlun mirror to collect the Fortune Gate's disciples who had already formed a team. The hundreds of thousands of disciples couldn't fly freely under the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Seeing the falling galaxy, they had no way to survive. Therefore, when they heard that Xiao Hua was willing to save them, they hurriedly formed a team and waited for the Celestial to collect them. Zilala! Rumbled, strange noises continued to ring out in the sky above Dawn and Dusk Cliff. Space was instantly corroded by the river of stars, and then shattered by the river sand. Fortunately, the heavy water was collected by Xiao Hua, and the river sand was blocked by Feng Wu. The ground wasn't destroyed anymore. Everyone was busy, and only Wen Chu was still standing quietly in the air. Her gaze was fixed on the pitch-black darkness, as if there were endless stories hidden in the darkness. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed in the pitch-black darkness, and then a clear voice shouted, How dare you? How dare you challenge the 5th princess's honor guard? Humph! What 5th princess and 6th princess? The lightning Taoist's arrogant voice sounded, I only have eyes for the 9th princess. You're courting death. That voice was like a silver bell, and it was none other than the voice of the Jasper Flower Palace's immortal envoy, Gu Xianyun. Then, there was the sound of an overwhelming chi pillar rumbling, and then a series of miserable screams rang out. A rain of blood mixed with corpses fell from the pitch-black darkness. Hearing that it was the 5th princess, Qingqing in the pitch-black darkness, Xiao Hua sneered and said in his heart, Injure the 5th princess and avenge Xianxia. Rumble. Just as Xiao Hua finished speaking, he saw the lightning above the Immortal Palace's galaxy, and miserable screams rang out again. Needless to say, it was the lightning Taoist's annihilation. How dare you injure an immortal emperor's descendant? Immortal Xiao, you violated the immortal law. At this moment, another voice came from the Immortal Palace's galaxy. Then, a general wearing an emperor's armor and a crown flashed over with a distorted figure. The general had just stood beside Xiao Hua when countless chi pillars turned into chains of inscriptions and rushed out. They danced wildly around the general and swept toward Xiao Hua. The master of the Supreme Purity Palace? Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the general's crowned face and saw the sun, moon, and stars above the emperor's armor. How could he not know that this was one of the masters of the 3 Purity Palace, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace that he had never seen before? Unfortunately, the master of the Supreme Purity Palace did not give Xiao Hua a chance to speak, nor did he allow Xiao Hua to resist. He stood still, raised his hand, and pulled out a sword from his waist. With a wave of his hand, the sword revealed a huge shadow and slashed toward Xiao Hua. Hiss! Xiao Hua was shocked. Looking at the huge shadow, he sucked in a breath of cold air. The Xianyuan sword? Of course, the sword in the master of the Supreme Purity Palace was bronze in color. One side of the sword was divided into 5 sections, respectively engraved with the sun, moon, and stars. The other side was divided into 9 sections, respectively engraved with mountains, rivers, and plants. On the sword hilt, one side of the sword was engraved with farming and animal husbandry techniques, while the other side was engraved with the strategy to unify the 4 seas. As the shadow flashed, the sun, moon, and stars lingered, the mountains, rivers, and plants danced, and an unparalleled sharpness cut through the void, setting off a wave of wind whistling. Xiao Hua was surprised, but he sighed again. He looked at the Fortune Gate's disciples and the 4 great families' disciples with some hesitation. At this time, he was concentrating on collecting the connate heavy water, so he couldn't divert his attention to fight the enemy. He couldn't even ask Taoist which to come out of the space. Because as soon as he withdrew his attention, the connate heavy water, which could destroy everything in the abyss below the Dawn and Dusk Cliff, would definitely fall. At that time, not to mention the 4 great families' disciples, many of the Fortune Gate's disciples would die. Moreover, if the connate heavy water fell into the abyss, Xiaohua couldn't guarantee that the heaven punishment prison crystal that imprisoned Xian would be intact. Xian could also be injured. Fight. Xiaohua gritted his teeth, not daring to withdraw his attention. He anxiously shouted in his heart, "Celestial," quickly called Taoist Witch out. "So it's you." At this time, Wen Chu, who had been standing still, suddenly spoke. He stared straight at the master of the Supreme Purity Palace and said word by word, "If you were so resolute and daring tens of thousands of years ago, how would you have let her die?" While speaking, Wen Chu suddenly opened his mouth. 9 sword intents flew out. The moment the sword intents touched the ground, they turned into 9 flying swords. They whimpered as they flew towards the Shenyuan sword's shadow in the shape of 9 stars. Wherever the sword light passed, cold light flashed like falling tears. The sound of swords rang out, and the whimpering sound was like mournful sobs. What was extremely strange was that when the 9 stars reached the Shenyuan sword's shadow, they turned into a flexible sword. As this flexible sword danced, it gave birth to a peerless sword splendor. The figure of a fairy flickered within the sword's splendor, and a kind of sword intent that was as rich as the grace of a beauty, and as chaotic as the sorrow of a beauty turned into flowing water and crashed into the shadow without hesitation. Chapter 46-24. Pear Blossom. Pear Blossom. Pear Blossom. All of a sudden, the master of Xianxia Palace shouted. His body, which was brimming with true qi, trembled violently. The shadow of the Shenyuan sword, which was chopping down with all his strength, unexpectedly stopped in mid-air. The shadow of the Shenyuan sword only stopped for a moment, but the sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, and vegetation all turned into fragments. The Shenyuan sword in the master of Xianxia Palace's hand flashed with a bronze sword light. This sword light was the result of him forcibly withdrawing his true qi. The sword light was like water, falling back into the body of the master of Xianxia Palace. Boom! A loud sound burst from the surface of the master of Xianxia Palace's body. The crown of the master of Xianxia Palace's crown flew away, revealing the true appearance of the master of Xianxia Palace. Li Xiubai? Xiaohua looked at the appearance of the master of Xianxia Palace and was stunned on the spot. Wasn't this the appearance of Li Xiubai's corpse that Xiaohua saw in the sword cave in the Mo Zhao Black Forest? Damn it this! What the hell is going on? Xiaohua groaned, his mind confused. The master of Xianxia Palace didn't pay attention to anything else, only staring at the peerless sword brilliance. Although he had put away the sword in time, how powerful was the Shenyuan sword? How powerful was the 9 stars transit? When the two collided, it was only a moment, but the figure of the beautiful fairy, the unending and chaotic emotions, had already dimmed. Pear Blossom. The master of Xianxia Palace muttered weakly, as if he couldn't even pick up the Shenyuan sword. You. She has already fallen. Wen Chu said faintly from the side. In these 9 sword pills, only some of her grief was left. Now that she has come here again, that grief has also dissipated. Everything began here, and it would also end here. Day and night, it's all yearning cliff. Looking at the fairy's figure turning into smoke, the master of Xianxia Palace suddenly reached out, as if he wanted to grab something. However, where his fingers landed, the smoke was disturbed. Not only did the fairy's figure disappear, but the smoke also turned into nothingness. Tears fell from the eyes of the master of Xianxia Palace. He asked softly, She. When she was in the 9-star sword pill, did she complain? The master of the Xianxia Palace looked like he was asking Wen Chu, but his gaze pierced through the void. It was as though he was looking at himself from tens of thousands of years ago. He had knelt powerlessly beside the Immortal Palace's galaxy, and watched as the Pear Blossom Fairy was killed by the Immortal Palace's galaxy. The gentle water-like sword that had split the Immortal Palace's galaxy into 2 was shattered by the Star River sand, and turned into a sword pill that fell into the void crack that suddenly appeared. Wen Chu didn't answer the palace master. He only closed his eyes as tears dripped down. After half a cup of tea's time, Wen Chu opened his eyes again. At this time, Wen Chu was neither happy nor sad. The tears at the corner of his eyes slowly disappeared as he said, I don't know if she is complaining or not. I only know that there's a poem inside the 9-star sword pill. See I? The eyes of the master of Xianxia Palace lit up. He asked with some fear and some expectation, "What see I?" The delicate clouds are skillful, the flying stars transmit hatred, and the silver river travels in secret. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it triumphs over countless mortals. Gentle as water, the auspicious day is like a dream, enduring the magpie bridge and returning home. If two people's feelings last for a long time, why should they be together day and night? Haha, I understand, I understand. The master of Xianxia Palace suddenly laughed wildly. Pear Blossom, oh Pear Blossom, you finally understand my difficulties. You have finally forgiven me. Day and night, night and night. Our hearts are in the same place. Which part of us isn't day and night? Boom! As the voice of the master of Xianxia Palace fell, a huge roar sounded again. Countless pillars of qi appeared out of thin air and turned into a huge hole that rushed into the top of the master of Xianxia Palace's head. At the same time, an extremely strange law descended from the sky and very vaguely entered Wenchu's body. In Wenchu's eyes, happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, and sorrow were like dazzling colors that appeared and disappeared 9 times in an instant. Then Wenchu slightly closed his eyes. When he opened them again, it was with a kind of sympathy. This change was very subtle. Only the muddle-headed Xiaohua suddenly felt as if he was missing something. He hurriedly looked at Wenchu, and the corner of Xiaohua's mouth formed a trace of a smile. Congratulations, Master of Xianxia Palace. After several breaths, the pillar of qi emitted a bright light. A scholarly cultivator wearing an emperor's golden armor descended from the sky. Wasn't this the master of Taiqing Palace? After the master of Taiqing Palace landed, he raised his hand and took the crown of the master of Xianxia Palace. He smiled and handed it to the master of Xianxia Palace. Congratulations, Master of Xianxia Palace. The knot in your heart is gone, and the day of your ascension is just around the corner. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to you. The master of Xianxia Palace took the crown but didn't put it on. Instead, he looked at the master of Literature Palace and said, "I still have to thank you for this matter." Not bad. The master of Taiqing Palace nodded and patted his head. The brilliance of the crown also disappeared, revealing his true appearance. Immortal bright sword? Although Xiaohua had already expected this, when he saw that the master of Taiqing Palace really was Immortal bright sword, Xiaohua couldn't help but groan. Li Xiubai and Immortal bright sword could be regarded as Xiaohua's master. Xiaohua not only obtained the inheritance of sword cultivation from Li Xiubai and Immortal bright sword in Mo Zhao Black Forest, but also obtained the Sword Heart Energy Seed technique and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening technique. At the same time, it was also because of the Sword Heart Energy Seed art and the Primordial Spirit Strengthening art that Xiaohua had the original intention of dividing his primordial spirit. Later on, Xiaohua obtained the Ghost Cultivator's Inextricable Threads art by chance. Only then did he truly try to divide his primordial spirit and create a complete primordial spirit. Later on, Xiaohua had a great fortune and obtained the demon race's external incarnation art. He even obtained the heavenly devil essence from the upper realm's ruins and cultivated into a true primordial spirit, allowing each primordial spirit to become a real person. But in the end, Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword's Sword Heart Energy Seed technique and Primordial Spirit Strengthening technique were the most fundamental origins of the Fortune Gate's 10 Masters. Looking at the familiar faces of the Masters of Taiqing Palace and Xianxia Palace, Xiaohua's doubts in the past finally settled. In the past, when Xiaohua obtained these two seemingly heaven-defying techniques, he was really puzzled. After all, these techniques couldn't be comprehended unless one was an almighty expert. Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword were merely nascent soul cultivators, so how could they have created such powerful techniques? What was special was that on the Dawn Rain continent, there were no other sects that cultivated these mysterious techniques. Even Immortal Bright Sword's Changbai sect and Li Xiubai's Flame Bamboo Sword sect didn't know about them. Only Xiaohua obtained their inheritance. This was obviously illogical. At that time, Xiaohua thought that the cultivators who cultivated these two secret techniques had died due to qi deviation. Only now did he understand that Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword weren't cultivators of the Dawn Rain continent. Their techniques might not have been passed down to their two sections. Only the Immortal Palace's dual purity palace master could have created such a miraculous primordial spirit-splitting technique, right? Of course, thinking of this, Xiaohua had another realization. The sword heart energy seed technique and the primordial spirit strengthening technique might not have been created by Li Xiubai and Immortal Bright Sword. Perhaps they were techniques that originally existed on the hidden Immortal continent, or even the three continents. Xiaohua's mind was full of thoughts. In just a moment, he immediately woke up and hurriedly told his experience to Wen Chu through his mind. At this time, the Tai Ching Palace Master looked at Wen Chu with a smile and said meaningfully, "Previously, this old man was very surprised. Whether it was from the Immortal Palace's records or our inference, we couldn't find your origin. If you said that you came from the outside world, your techniques are exactly the same as our Confucian cultivators. Only now did this old man know that you came from that place." Wen Chu nodded and bowed to the Tai Ching Palace Master and the Tai Ching Palace Master. This disciple was lucky enough to obtain the legacy of the two seniors in the Mo Zhao Black Forest. All these years, I have always been grateful for the two seniors' gifts. Today, seeing you, please accept this disciple's master's salute. At this time, Wen Chu's strength had already surpassed the Tai Ching Palace Master and the Tai Ching Palace Master. The Tai Ching Palace Master's previous words were just to get closer to them. They didn't expect Wen Chu to actually salute them as master and disciple. This was a salute from the Wen Chu Palace Master. It was also a salute from a Confucian cultivator. The two were already frightened and wanted to quickly raise their hands to support Wen Chu. Unfortunately, under Wen Chu's insistence, how could the Tai Ching Palace Master resist? The two were surprised but also somewhat helpless and happy. They were surprised because Wen Chu's strength was really powerful. They immediately felt that Wen Chu's true qi was like an ocean, surging and endless. The two were helpless because with this salute, Wen Chu's previous master and disciple relationship had actually ended. Wen Chu didn't have any special karma with them anymore. The two were happy because although Wen Chu's master and disciple relationship had ended, Wen Chu's salute itself showed that he respected his master. This kind of affection couldn't be replaced by simple calculations. The ancients said that if three people walk together, there will always be a teacher. The Tai Ching Palace Master smiled and said, "The Wen Chu Palace Master is too rigid. Before, we might have been your master. Now, the one who has achieved is the master. You are the master of us Confucian cultivators. We also want to salute you." With that, the two also pretended to salute. Wen Chu smiled and said, "You salute me, I salute you. When will it end?" Tai Ching Palace Master, there are two other immortal friends who are resisting the Celestial Palace's Milky Way. The Tai Ching Palace Master didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master and asked with a smile, "What do you think?" "Haha, I have a knot in my heart. Setting up this Milky Way formation can be considered as fulfilling my promise to the Celestial Palace. As for whether the Milky Way formation can kill people, it's not something I can control." The Tai Ching Palace Master laughed and said, "Of course, I can't accept the Milky Way formation. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble the Wen Chu Palace Master to do it personally." Chapter 46-25. Good. Please wait here for a moment. Wen Chu nodded and replied. His figure turned into a shadow and rushed into the sky. At this time, the pitch-black area was filled with torrential innate heavy water and refined stars like river sand. Xiaohua stood steadily in midair. The entire galaxy seemed to be returning to its origin as it fell into his hands. And in Xiaohua's hand, he had taken out a jade bottle at an unknown time as a cover. He looked very relaxed. Feng Wu was in another place. Her several thousand zhong-long demonic body moved, roaring with the power of countless stars and moons to block the falling stars. Those blocked stars were also mercilessly absorbed by Xiaohua into the space. Without the master of the Supreme Pure Palace, the galaxy formation couldn't stop Wen Chu. Wen Chu nodded at Xiaohua and Feng Wu. He rushed through the galaxy formation and saw above the torrential galaxy was the location of the earth, fire, wind, and lightning. Tens of thousands of immortal soldiers and immortal generals formed a great formation and hid within the earth, fire, wind, and lightning. In this immortal formation, there was a very eye-catching canopy. At this time, the Thunder Immortal condensed a lightning spear. Like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he was invincible and had already arrived under the canopy. In front of the canopy, there were dozens of literary saints desperately trying to resist. Each of them used their Confucian cultivation techniques. Awe-inspiring qi surged and 5 colored clouds gushed out, wanting to protect the canopy. However, how could these literary saints resist the lightning spear of the Thunder Immortal? Under the lightning spear, the awe-inspiring qi was destroyed and the 5 colored clouds were torn apart. The literary saints who were like immortals in the eyes of ordinary people were also killed by the lightning spear of the Thunder Immortal. Seeing several literary saints and hundreds of immortal soldiers and immortal generals being killed, the dozens of literary saints were already afraid and didn't dare to move forward. The Thunderbolt Immortal swayed his thunder spear again, and several phantoms appeared, about to point at the 4 literary sages. The 4 literary sages' faces turned ashen, and they tried their best to urge their imperial equipment to resist. A delicate voice came from the imperial canopy. "Stop!" As the voice faded away, the 5-colored light above the canopy slowly converged. The inscription chains that looked like dragons slithering around the light turned into armor and fell into the canopy. A woman in a palace dress appeared from the light. Her skin was snow-white, her eyebrows were thin like willows, and her eyes were slightly narrowed. Wasn't this the Immortal Emperor's 5th princess, Qing? The Thunderbolt Immortal rolled his eyes and said coldly, "Do you think I'll stop just because you tell me to? Do you think you are Princess Xianxia?" As he spoke, the lightning spear of the Taoist Thunderbolt continued onward, piercing through the defensive true energy of the 4 sword saints. At the same time, the lightning spear pierced deeply into their fleshly bodies. 2 of them were hit in the shoulder, and the other 2 landed on the waist. As the 4 of them screamed, their bodies fell into the galaxy. After the 4 literary sages, there were 2 beautiful female officials. One was Gu Xianyun and the other was Yu Xiaojing. Yu Xiaojing's face was pale as if she had never seen such a situation before. Although Gu Xianyun panicked, there was still a trace of luck on her face. Seeing the Thunderbolt Immortal approaching, Gu Xianyun glanced at Princess Qing and hurriedly flew in front of her, scolding, "Thunderbolt Immortal, didn't you hear? Our 5th princess has asked you to stop. If you take half a step more." Gu Xianyun was also confused. In order to show her courage in front of Princess Qing, she actually blocked the Thunderbolt Immortal's path. How could the Thunderbolt Immortal show mercy to a woman? Without waiting for Gu Xianyun to finish speaking, he raised his hand and waved it. Boom! A thunderbolt appeared near Gu Xianyun and killed her in an instant. Gu Xianyun didn't even have the time to scream before she died immediately. It was a pity that Gu Xianyun used a Taoist nascent soul as a medicinal ingredient and casually killed her. Now, in the Karma reincarnation, she met the Thunderbolt Immortal who was born to report the Tao. At this moment, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't have much human emotion. Facing Gu Xianyun, he killed her casually and ended a karma. "Damn it! All of you back off." Princess Qing's eyes were filled with anger, and her sharp chin made her look even more beautiful. Red Lips opened her mouth and said, "Thunderbolt Immortal, you're a Taoist cultivator. Now that you've cultivated to the highest realm, you should know that the Confucian cultivators on the hidden immortal continent are the supreme beings, and our immortal palace is even more outstanding. All the more reason you should know your destiny and cooperate with our immortal palace to walk the last part of your path well. Today, you can kill all the immortal generals and literary sages of our immortal palace, but what can you get? In the future, you will face the endless pursuit of the immortal palace. Your cultivation will be interfered with. Even if you take the last step and prepare to ascend, the immortal palace will never let you ascend smoothly. Think about the primordial chaos ancestor. He was much more arrogant than all of you back then, but what happened to him now?" The Thunderbolt Immortal ignored Princess Qing's words and raised his hands. Kacha! 2 huge thunderbolts appeared and struck the canopy. Boom! The canopy couldn't withstand the heavy blow and collapsed. The layers of runes whimpered and dissipated in the lightning. This princess is a descendant of the Immortal Emperor. You violated the immortal law by daring to offend your superior. Princess Qing was a bit scared, but she still held on. However, her tone was already very weak. Princess Qing naturally had her own plans. She only spoke without circulating any true qi, nor did she use any imperial artifacts to defend herself. She believed that as a Grand Ascension stage cultivator of the Dao sect, the Thunderclap Taoist was also a man, so he most likely wouldn't bully a weak and beautiful woman like her. The Thunderclap Taoist had most likely forced his way in to coerce her. Unfortunately, Princess Xianxia didn't know that Thunderbolt Immortal wasn't much of a person, let alone a man. Thunderbolt Immortal rushed forward and saw the canopy dissipating, revealing Princess Xianxia's figure. Thunderbolt Immortal's arm immediately turned into lightning as he punched at Princess Xianxia. Boom! Princess Xianxia's heart tightened and her beautiful face paled when she saw the runes on the armor crumble under the fist light. Before the fist hit Princess Xianxia's body, the Thunderbolt Immortal suddenly remembered that Xiaohua only wanted him to injure Princess Xianxia, not kill her. Therefore, he spread out his hand and solidly slapped Princess Xianxia's proud protrusion. Princess Xianxia's expression greatly changed. Pfff. She spat out a mouthful of blood and her pale face was filled with extreme shame and anger. Princess Xianxia didn't know what she wanted to say. The place that no man had ever touched was snatched away by a 9th-level elemental energy expert. A feeling that she had never felt before was easily born in this sharp and domineering woman's heart. However, Princess Xianxia didn't have time to deal with this strange feeling. She hurriedly circulated her true qi to heal her injuries while preparing to escape. Fortunately, the Thunderbolt Immortal didn't attack again. Instead, he hovered in the air and stared at Princess Xianxia with sharp eyes. The Galaxy Formation's disc. The Thunderbolt Immortal was famous for his thunderbolt. His gaze was truly powerful, piercing into Princess Xianxia's heart. In her life, when had anyone given Princess Xianxia such a shock? Who dared to look Princess Xianxia in the eye so brazenly? Who dared to speak to Princess Xianxia in such an unrestrained manner? Princess Xianxia couldn't help but raise her hand to her chest. Of course, she only raised her hand and immediately put it down. She shrieked, "You killed me with one palm." Unfortunately, before she could finish, the Thunderbolt Immortal reached his hand into her chest and took out an oval-shaped pendant. See. Princess Xianxia sucked in a breath of cold air. She felt as if lightning had struck her and her entire body was paralyzed. However, what Princess Xianxia couldn't accept was that after the Thunderbolt Immortal took the pendant, he turned around and his gaze didn't linger on her body at all. He turned into a bolt of lightning and flew away. See. The literary saints around the canopy all sucked in a breath of cold air that was even greater than Princess Xianxia's. Moreover, this cold air was enough to freeze them to death. Who in the Immortal Palace didn't know Princess Xianxia's methods? How could they survive after seeing Princess Xianxia being humiliated? However, what happened next made them go wild with joy. Princess Xianxia sat on the clouds and watched the Thunderbolt Immortal's figure turn into lightning. She was silent for a long time. After a while she gritted her teeth and stood up shouting, "Let's go! Today's matter. Whoever dares to say a word will be killed without mercy." The dozens of literary saints were relieved of a heavy burden. How could they dare to stay here for a moment longer? They either urged their bodies to give orders or stayed far away and let the female officials come over to serve them. The Thunderbolt Immortal handed the pendant to Wenchu. Wenchu breathed out a mouthful of Zhenqi on the pendant, and the Astral River Grand Array appeared. As the master of the School of Literature, Wenchu could easily break the Astral River Grand Array. By the time the Array Eye of the Earth, Fire, Wind, and Lightning Grand Array was closed, the heavenly heavy water and Astral River Sand had disappeared. Wenchu put away the formation disc and it turned back into a pendant. Wenchu casually tossed it to the Thunderbolt Immortal. He looked at it and sniffed it before putting it in front of his eyes again. However, when the Thunderbolt Immortal raised his head and looked at the spatial rift where the earth, fire, wind, and lightning resided, he saw Princess Xianxia's bashful gaze and hateful expression as she gnashed her teeth in hatred. "Hee, you still want what's in I's hands back?" The Thunderbolt Immortal waved his hand proudly, and actually drew a thunderbolt heart shape in the air. He laughed inwardly. "Even if it's your heart, I won't give it back to you. Give it a tip, and thank you for all your support." Chapter 46-26. Damn it! Seeing the Thunderbolt Immortal's blatant flirting, Princess Xianxia was really angry and anxious. She stomped her feet and wanted to throw a tantrum, but the Sage of Literature and the female officials had long disappeared from her side. No one dared to approach her when she was about to retreat. With the Milky Way Grand Formation broken, the 1,000-li space imprisonment force disappeared. The remaining several 100,000 disciples of the four families could move again. However, they still stood in the air, maintaining their formation as they looked at the celestial being. Seeing the restriction disappear, the celestial being asked, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, how should we deal with these disciples? Should we kill them all? Or should we just let them surrender?" Xiaohua pondered for a moment, then smiled and asked Wen Chu, who was descending from the sky. "The Milky Way Grand Formation was broken by fellow Taoist, so let's leave this matter to fellow Taoist." Looking at Xiaohua's smile, Wen Chu pondered for a moment, then said with a flick of his sleeve, "These disciples are Confucian cultivators, born from the same roots as this old man, and they are also this old man's disciples. Naturally, this old man cannot kill them. If they were captured, they might not be sincere about surrendering. Especially since Immortal Emperor Go Chan has set up an ambush here, wanting us to perish together with the four families. Why should we let him succeed? If we let these disciples go, the four families' strength will be preserved, and it can also be considered as a restraint to the Immortal Palace, preventing them from burning the bridge after crossing the river." "Deal." Xiaohua smiled. "I fully agree with fellow Taoist's decision. If we kill these disciples, who will know that we have defeated the four families' joint forces at the Dawn and Sky Cliff? If the news of us killing several 100,000 people leaks out, the Confucian cultivators may be shocked temporarily, but as time passes, they will definitely see us as butchers. Since that is the case, let them go." Naturally, the celestial being would not listen to Wen Chu. Hearing Xiaohua's nod, he waved his hand and said, "Let's go." "Many thanks to Immortal Master. Many thanks to Master Xiao Lei." The heavy stone in the hearts of the several 100,000 disciples of the four families finally fell to the ground. They bowed respectfully, then flew away from the Dawn and Sky Cliff in an orderly manner under the lead of the leading disciples. In this battle, the four families' 900,000 disciples were killed by the Fortune Gates disciples, and Xiao Hua's Aurora Magnetism Array had injured 350,000 disciples. The Fortune Gates disciples took the opportunity to kill another 110,000 disciples, leaving only a little over 500,000 disciples who escaped with injuries. Just as Xiao Hua had said, news of this battle spread throughout the hidden Immortal continent in less than half a day. The shock this battle brought to the Confucian cultivators was even greater than before. The Fortune Gate and Taoist Xiao had already become invincible in the 9 continents. The masters of the 2 pure palaces watched as Wen Chu released the 500,000 aristocratic clan disciples. Their eyes held some regret, but at the same time, there was some joy. They glanced at each other, flew into the clouds and saluted Feng Wu. "We greet the starry sky great sage." Feng Wu didn't slack off either. He transformed into his human form and returned the greeting with cupped fists. "Greetings, Lord of Supreme Purity Palace." "Greetings, Lord of Supreme Purity Palace." The Tai Ching Palace Master respectfully said, "The starry sky great sage has come from afar to the hidden Immortal continent. We did not know and failed to welcome you. Please forgive us, forgive us." "It's fine." Feng Wu waved his hand and said, "This saint only came to the Soaring Dragon Mountain range to visit an old friend. Being able to come here is just a coincidence. You don't need to mind." Speaking up to hear, Feng Wu smiled and cupped his fists at Xiao Hua. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, this saint will not disturb you. Farewell." "Many thanks for today's matter, Feng Wu." Xiao Hua cupped his fists and said with a smile, "When I have time in the future, this Xiao will personally go to the Great Sage Hall to express his gratitude." "Well said, well said." Feng Wu revealed his demon form and prepared to flap his wings. This saint and Peng Sage will be waiting for Master Zhao's arrival. Feng Wu. Seeing Feng Wu and Xiao Hua being so close, and that Feng Wu was about to leave, the Tai Ching Palace Master hurriedly said, "The sutra seeking extreme bliss is about to end. The Immortal Palace and Thunder Temple have jointly invited Feng Wu and Peng Sage from the Great Sage Hall to attend the ceremony." Before the sutra seeking extreme bliss, Feng Wu did not enter the Great Sage Hall. Now that the sutra seeking extreme bliss is over, Feng Wu should also come to attend the ceremony. Feng Wu smiled and said, "Before this saint left the Great Sage Hall, I did not hear Peng Sage mention this matter. Wait for him to mention it to this saint." With that said, Feng Wu flapped his wings and disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Fellow Taoist Xiao." The lightning Taoist looked at the celestial being and said, I and fellow Taoist Tian will take the Fortune Gate's disciples back first. Who knows if Immortal Emperor Gaochen and the 4 great clans will attack the soaring Dragon Mountain range at the same time. To fight with these Confucian cultivators, other than strength, we also need to compete in cunning. The Tai Ching Palace Master blushed slightly and was about to speak, but the Tai Ching Palace Master transmitted a few words to him, and he shut his mouth again. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Lei Ting." Then, the Lightning Taoist and the Celestial being left with the remaining Fortune Gate's disciples. Seeing that everyone had left, the Tai Ching Palace Master smiled and said, "Master Xiao Lei, can we stay behind and talk in detail?" Xiaohua shook his head and said, "I'm sure the two of you know the purpose of this Xiao's visit," so saying this, Xiaohua looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master. "What purpose?" The Tai Ching Palace Master was stunned and looked at Xiaohua with confusion. Xiaohua was stunned and asked curiously, "Why did fellow Taoist set up the Milky Way Grand Formation here?" The Tai Ching Palace Master looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master and explained, "This king was originally wandering the hidden Immortal continent when I suddenly received the Immortal Palace's secret order to set up a formation here. In order to fulfill my promise to the Immortal Palace, this king had no choice but to do this. As for the purpose of setting up the formation, this king did not know before. Everything was coordinated by the 5th princess. Of course, when I saw the Fortune Gate and the 4 great clans appear, this king understood a lot. Just now, the 5th princess passed down the Immortal Emperor's secret order." The Tai Ching Palace Master did not finish his words, and he even glanced at Wen Chu before he finished speaking. However, Xiaohua understood that Chao Muya's plan was not out of Dongfang Qionghao's expectations. The Immortal Palace was planning to take advantage of the Sandpiper and Clams fight. In fact, they might even be planning to kill Wen Chu. This Immortal Emperor Go Chen is too cunning. Xiaohua sighed inwardly. No wonder Xianxia once said that the Immortal Palace is inferior to the mortal world. However, when he thought about how ruthless Dongfang Qionghao and the others were, abandoning hundreds of thousands of disciples after seeing that they were no match for the Immortal Palace, Xiaohua shook his head helplessly. The hidden Immortal continent is so big, and the 4 great clans and the 100 schools of philosophers are so arrogant. I'm afraid only an ambitious character like Immortal Emperor Go Chan can suppress them, right? The Tai Ching Palace Master does not know. When the Tai Ching Palace Master saw this, he hurriedly said, "Taoist Xiao is now our Immortal Palace's Lightning Master." The Tai Ching Palace Master told him about how Xiaohua had forced the Immortal Palace's southern heavenly gate. The Tai Ching Palace Master was a sentimental person, and when he heard that Xiaohua had attacked the southern heavenly gate for the sake of Xianxia, his heart was already filled with admiration. The way he looked at Xiaohua was no longer as guarded as before, and there was even a hint of apology in his eyes. When the Tai Ching Palace Master finished speaking, the Tai Ching Palace Master bowed and said, "Lightning Master Xiao, this king had no choice. Please forgive me." "Haha, it's fine, it's fine." Xiaohua hurriedly returned the bow. The ignorant person is not guilty. Moreover, isn't there a saying that goes no discord, no concord? Good. The Tai Ching Palace Master was relieved that he was forgiven, but soon after, he frowned again. He lowered his head to look at the abyss and said, "Lightning Master Xiao, this king was only following orders to set up the formation, and did not know whether the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal where the 9th princess was imprisoned was at the bottom of the abyss. Moreover, this matter." As he said this, the Tai Ching Palace Master looked at the Tai Ching Palace Master with a troubled expression. The Tai Ching Palace Master continued, "If Lightning Master Xiao wants to find the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal, it is not now. After we finish speaking, Lightning Master Xiao can go down and look for it. The two of us do not have Immortal Emperor Go Chen's orders, so it is not good for us to stay and help." AI troublesome. Xiaohua naturally wanted to find the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal that was imprisoning Xianxia as soon as possible. However, in order to avoid the Tai Ching Palace Master, he was afraid that they would discover the secret of his clone, so he sent Feng Wu, Celestial Being, and Lightning Master away a step earlier. He did not even leave behind the Fortune Gate disciples, especially the Kunlun mirror that was taken away by Celestial Being. At this time, he did not have any more people to help him explore the abyss. "Forget it. It is not now." Xiaohua pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "No matter, we will talk about it in detail when we land." When the four of them landed, they looked at each other in dismay. None of them knew what to say. The Tai Ching Palace Master pondered for a moment, then said to the Tai Ching Palace Master with a smile, "This matter started because of you, you should speak first." The Tai Ching Palace Master smiled bitterly. He pinched his chin and pondered for a long time before saying, "This matter is also a long story. Other than the Tai Ching Palace Master, no one in the Immortal Palace knows about this secret, not even the Pure Jade Palace Master. However, since the Scala Palace Master and Lightning Master Xiao are involved in this secret, then this king will casually speak." While speaking, the Tai Ching Palace Master waved his hand and laid down a defensive array. Xiao Hua nodded inwardly. The legend of the tender-like water sword was indeed different from the real situation. The real Pear Blossom Fairy was a woman who dared to love and hate. Moreover, she was not abandoned by the Tai Ching Palace Master. However, this Pear Blossom Fairy was too domineering. She insisted that the Tai Ching Palace Master at that time marry her and give her a status. Although the Tai Ching Palace Master loved her and was willing to marry her, he was in the Immortal Palace after all. He had his own responsibilities and difficulties. The Pear Blossom Fairy believed him at first and waited for hundreds of years. However, he did not come to propose marriage. Thus, the Pear Blossom Fairy held her sword and forced her way to the southern Heavenly Gate to ask for an explanation. The guards of the Heavenly King Palace at the southern Heavenly Gate naturally would not allow the Pear Blossom Fairy to enter the Immortal Palace, even if she had his token. However, it was also because of the token that the guards did not make things difficult for the Pear Blossom Fairy. Unfortunately, the Pear Blossom Fairy had a fiery temper. After waiting for several days and seeing the Immortal Generals rolling their eyes at her, how could she endure it? She actually forgot her original intention and clashed with the guards of the Southern Heavenly Gate, wanting to barge into the Southern Heavenly Gate. The Heavenly King Palace's immortal soldiers and immortal generals naturally did not dare to neglect their duties and fought with the Pear Blossom Fairy. The tender-like water sword was indeed powerful. Although it did not kill tens of thousands of immortal soldiers with a single sword strike, it still killed hundreds of immortal soldiers and injured several immortal generals. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.